The champagne flutes froze midair. 200 guests in designer gowns and tailored tuxedos stood paralyzed as Marcus Wellington, heir to the Wellington pharmaceutical fortune, abandoned his bride at the altar and walked straight down the aisle toward a man in a plain gray suit. Not toward family, not toward the groomsmen, toward the quiet stranger sitting beside Arya Sterling, the bride's younger sister, whose hand he'd been holding for exactly 47 seconds. "Sir," Marcus said, his voice cracking across the cathedral silence, "I owe you everything." And just like that, the man everyone had dismissed, whispered about, and pitied all evening became the most powerful person in the room. But 3 weeks earlier, he'd been nobody at all, exactly the way he wanted it. Before we dive into this story, if you're enjoying it so far, hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Now, let's go back to where it all began. 3 weeks earlier, Jonas Mercer sat in the back corner of Bruin Pages like a man trying to disappear into the furniture. The bookstore cafe smelled like old paperbacks and burnt espresso, and the mismatched chairs wobbled when you shifted your weight. But it was his. Not in ownership. He didn't own anything anymore. Not really. But in the way a person claims a space by returning to it until the barista stops asking for your name. He'd been coming here every Tuesday and Thursday for 6 months. Always at 2:30, always to the same table beneath the fiction section where someone had scrawled, "Reading is dreaming with open eyes," in Sharpie on the exposed brick. His daughter Lily would be at school for another hour, which gave him exactly 60 minutes to sit with a book he wouldn't finish and coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes ago while he stared at the same paragraph over and over. Today the paragraph was about a man who'd lost everything and was trying to figure out if starting over meant becoming someone new or finally becoming who he'd always been. Jonas still didn't know which one he was doing. The bell above the door chimed. He didn't look up. The cafe was never crowded on weekday afternoons. A few college students with laptops, a retired couple sharing a scone, the regulars who treated the place like a living room. The sound of footsteps crossed the worn hardwood, hesitated near the counter, then continued toward the back, toward his table. Jonas kept his eyes on his book, a defensive habit he'd perfected over the past 2 years. Don't make eye contact. Don't invite conversation. Don't give anyone a reason to ask questions or remember your face. "Is anyone sitting here?" The voice was quiet, almost apologetic. Jonas looked up despite himself. The woman standing beside the empty chair across from him looked like she'd dressed in the dark. Oversized Stanford sweatshirt, jeans with a hole in one knee, hair pulled back in a messy ponytail with pieces falling loose around her face. No makeup that he could see. Dark circles under her eyes that spoke of too many late nights or not enough sleep or both. She looked exhausted. She looked normal. She looked like she belonged here. "No," Jonas said. "Go ahead." She sat down with the grateful sigh of someone who'd been on her feet too long, setting a beaten leather messenger bag on the floor and a plain black coffee on the table. No laptop, no phone visible, just her and the coffee and a weariness that seemed to settle into her shoulders like old weight. For a while, neither of them spoke. Jonas returned to his paragraph. The man in the story was burning letters from his old life one by one, and the woman across from him simply sat there, hands wrapped around her cup, staring at nothing in particular. It was the most comfortable silence Jonas had experienced with a stranger in 2 years. 20 minutes passed, then 30. The college students packed up their laptops. The retired couple left. New customers came and went, and still the woman sat there drinking her coffee in small sips, looking like she was hiding from something just as hard as he was. Finally, she spoke. "Do you ever just need to be somewhere where nobody knows your name?" Jonas looked up. She wasn't looking at him. Her eyes were fixed on the Sharpie quote above his head, but the question hung in the air between them like an offering. "Every day," he said quietly. She nodded, just once. "Me too." That was all. She didn't ask his name, didn't offer hers, didn't launch into the story of why she needed anonymity or press him for his. She just acknowledged the shared understanding and went back to her coffee, and Jonas went back to his book, and somehow the silence became even more comfortable than before. At 3:15, Jonas closed his book and stood. "I have to pick up my daughter from school." "How old?" "8. That's a good age, the woman said, and something in her voice suggested she actually knew what she was talking about, not just making conversation. Old enough to have real thoughts? Young enough to still think you hung the moon? Jonas smiled despite himself. For now. I figure I've got maybe 2 more years before she realizes I'm just making it up as I go. Aren't we all? The woman said softly. He left without saying goodbye, but when he glanced back from the door, she'd turned in her chair and given him a small wave. Not friendly, exactly, more like acknowledgement between two people who'd survived something similar and recognized each other in passing. Jonas found himself thinking about her on the drive to Lily's school, about the careful way she'd asked if the seat was taken, like she was used to being turned away, about the dark circles under her eyes, and the Stanford sweatshirt that looked like it had been worn 100 times and washed half as many. About the way she'd asked if he ever needed to be somewhere nobody knew his name, not do you, but do you ever, like it was an ongoing condition rather than a one-time occurrence. She'd looked like someone hiding in plain sight. He knew the feeling. Daddy! Lily burst out of the school doors like she'd been launched from a cannon, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders, brown braids flying. We learned about the solar system today, and did you know that Jupiter has 79 moons? 79? That's more moons than days in 2 months. Jonas caught her in a hug, breathing in the smell of playground mulch and cafeteria pizza. That's a lot of moons. Miss Rodriguez said some of them are so small they don't even have names yet. They just have numbers. Imagine being a moon and not even getting a name. Lily pulled back, her face serious with 8-year-old indignation. That's not fair. No, Jonas agreed, unlocking the car. That's not fair at all. They drove home to the small 2-bedroom apartment Jonas had rented after everything fell apart. After the divorce, after the media circus, after he'd walked away from the company and the money and the life that had almost destroyed him. The apartment was in an older building with unreliable heating and a landlord who took 3 weeks to fix anything, but it was theirs. No photographers, no board members, no ex-wife's lawyers sending threatening letters about custody arrangements. Just him and Lily and a fresh start that still felt fragile most days. Can we have pancakes for dinner? Lily asked, dropping her backpack by the door with the casual disregard for property that only children possess. Breakfast for dinner? Revolutionary. You always say that. Because it's always revolutionary. Jonas headed to this kitchen, pulling out the mixing bowl and flour. Did you finish your math homework? In class? It was easy. Lily climbed onto one of the mismatched stools at the counter, swinging her legs. There's a new girl at school. Her name is Emma, and she has a lizard named Sir Hopsalot. Even though lizards don't hop, they crawl. I told her that's false advertising, and she said that's what makes it funny. Jonas whisked eggs and milk together. Sounds like you made a friend. Maybe. She sits alone at lunch like I do. Lily traced patterns on the counter with one finger. Do you think people sit alone because they want to, or because nobody asks them to sit together? The question landed heavier than she probably meant it. Jonas set down the whisk. I think sometimes it's a little bit of both. Sometimes people need space. Sometimes they're waiting for the right person to ask. Which one are you? He looked at his daughter, too perceptive, too aware, carrying knowledge that 8-year-olds shouldn't have to carry about how quickly life can change and how hard it is to trust people afterward. Both, he said honestly. Some days I need space. Some days I'm still figuring out who the right people are. Lily nodded, satisfied with this answer in a way she wouldn't have been a year ago. The divorce had taught her that adults don't always have answers, and that sometimes I don't know, or both, is the truest response anyone can give. They ate pancakes at the counter while Lily talked about Sir Hopsalot and Jupiter's 79 moons, and the substitute teacher who'd let them watch a documentary about deep-sea creatures during science class. Normal conversation, normal evening, the kind of ordinary Tuesday that Jonas had built his entire life around protecting. After dinner, Lily curled up on the couch with her library book, something about dragons and girls with swords, while Jonas did the dishes and tried not to think about the woman at the cafe. But she kept slipping into his thoughts anyway. The exhausted set of her shoulders, the way she'd wrapped both hands around her coffee cup, like she was trying to absorb its warmth. The question that had sounded less like small talk and more like a password. Do you ever just need to be somewhere where nobody knows your name? He'd spent 2 years building a life where nobody knew his name, where Jonas Mercer was just another single dad doing school pickups and grocery runs and trying to keep his daughter happy in a world that had gotten too complicated too fast, where he could sit in a bookstore cafe for an hour twice a week and nobody asked him about investments or market trends or whether he'd seen the latest article questioning his sanity for walking away from billions. The woman in the cafe had looked like she understood that, like she was running from something too. Jonas Mercer had learned the hard way that the people who understand running are often the ones who've had to do it themselves. Thursday afternoon, 2:30. Jonas sat in his corner beneath the reading quote with a different book, something about a detective and a missing heir that he wasn't paying attention to, and wondered if she'd come back. She did. The bell chimed at 2:40. He didn't look up, but he heard the footsteps cross the cafe, heard them pause at the counter for coffee, heard them approach his table. Is the seat still available? Jonas looked up. Same sweatshirt, different jeans, hair still pulled back, dark circles perhaps slightly lighter, or maybe that was wishful thinking. Yeah, he said. It's available. She sat down with the same grateful sigh, setting her coffee in the same spot. This time she had a book with her, a thick paperback thriller with a bent cover, but she didn't open it, just held it in her lap like a prop. They sat in silence for 10 minutes. Then 15. Jonas read the same page 3 times. The woman across from him stared at her book without opening it. Do you come here often? She finally asked, then immediately winced. That sounded like a terrible pickup line. I didn't mean... Tuesdays and Thursdays, Jonas said, rescuing her. 2:30 to 3:15. The schedule helps. Helps with what? Everything, he said simply. She nodded slowly, understanding in her eyes. I'm Arya. Jonas. They didn't shake hands, didn't exchange last names, didn't launch into the biographical details that strangers usually trade like currency. Just first names given carefully, like gifts that could be taken back if handled wrong. What are you reading? Arya asked. Jonas held up the detective novel. Something about a missing heir and family secrets. I'm not really following it. Too close to home? The question was perceptive enough that Jonas tensed before he could stop himself. But when he looked at Arya, she wasn't watching him with the calculating interest of someone digging for information. She just looked tired and understanding, like someone who'd asked the question because she knew what it felt like to have fiction hit too close to reality. Something like that, he said carefully. You? Arya held up her thriller. Corporate espionage and murder. My therapist would probably say it's me processing work stress through violent fantasy. You have a therapist who says things like that? I have a therapist who's been trying to get me to quit my job for 6 months. Arya set the book on the table. She's probably right, but I'm stubborn. About the job or the therapist? Both? A small smile. What about you? Any professionals telling you to make better life choices? Jonas thought about the lawyers who'd called him insane for walking away from the settlement, the financial advisors who'd sent increasingly desperate emails about preserving his legacy, the former colleagues who'd stopped just short of staging an intervention when he'd traded his penthouse for a 2-bedroom apartment and refused to return their calls. A few, he said. I stopped listening. Good, Arya said firmly. The people who tell you how to live your life are usually the ones who don't have to live with the consequences. They fell back into silence, but it felt different now. Less like two strangers tolerating proximity, and more like two people who'd recognized something familiar in each other and decided, tentatively, to acknowledge it. At 3:10, Jonas started gathering his things. I have to pick up your daughter, I remember. Arya smiled. 8 years old, still thinks you hung the moon. For now. Hey, Jonas? Arya's voice stopped him halfway out of his chair. Thanks for not asking questions. He understood immediately what she meant. Thanks for not pressing about the therapist or the job, or why she looked like she hadn't slept in days. Thanks for offering the same courtesy he'd needed, the chance to be present without being interrogated. Same to you, Jonas said. This time when he left, she didn't wave, But when he glanced back from the door, she'd opened her book and was actually reading it, and something about her posture looked less burdened than it had 40 minutes ago. Maybe it was the company, maybe it was the coffee, maybe it was just the relief of sitting across from someone who understood that sometimes people need to hide in plain sight, and that the kindest thing you can do is let them. Mud. The pattern established itself over the next 2 weeks, Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, 2:30 to 3:15. Jonas arrived first, claimed their table, ordered his coffee. Arya showed up 10 or 15 minutes later, always dressed down, always looking exhausted, always settling into the chair across from him with that same grateful sigh. They talked, but only in the spaces between comfortable silences. Small things, surface things, the kind of information you could share with a stranger without revealing anything that mattered. Jonas learned that Arya worked in finance, family business, it's complicated, and that she'd gone to Stanford for business but wished she'd studied literature instead. That she drank her coffee black because her father had told her adding cream and sugar was weak, and she'd believed him until she was too stubborn to admit he was wrong. That she'd had a fish named Hamlet who died when she was 12, and she'd given him a funeral that included a eulogy and a shoebox coffin. Arya learned that Jonas had worked in tech, before, when things were different, and that he read mostly mystery novels because they were the only stories where all the pieces eventually made sense. That he'd taught himself to cook after the divorce because Lily deserved better than frozen dinners, but his pancakes were still the only thing he could make really well. That he'd once believed in second chances until he'd realized some things break too thoroughly to repair. They didn't discuss why Jonas had a divorce he couldn't talk about, or why Arya looked like she was carrying the weight of a family business on her shoulders, or why they both needed a corner booth in a bookstore cafe to feel human for 45 minutes twice a week. Some things didn't need to be said. On the third Thursday, Arya asked about Lily. "What's she like?" "Your daughter." Jonas set down his book. He'd finally given up on the detective novel and switched to science fiction, and considered the question. Not the easy answer, not the proud parent response, the real one. "Braver than I am," he said finally. "When everything fell apart, when we had to move and change schools, and I couldn't explain half of what was happening because she was only 6 and 6-year-olds shouldn't have to understand why their parents hate each other. She just adapted. She made the best of it. She didn't complain about the smaller apartment or the fact that she couldn't do ballet anymore because we couldn't afford it, or that her mom only called once a month." Jonas realized he was gripping his coffee cup too hard and forced himself to relax. She just kept going. Like as long as I was okay, she'd be okay. Which meant I had to figure out how to be okay even when I wasn't, because she was watching. Arya was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft. "That's a lot of pressure." "Yeah," Jonas said, "but it's also the only reason I'm still here. The only reason I didn't—" He stopped, pulling back from the edge of honesty. "It gave me something to fight for." "You're a good dad," Arya said simply. "I'm trying to be." "That's the same thing." Another silence, but this one felt heavier, like they'd each revealed something that couldn't be taken back, and now they were sitting with the weight of it, deciding what it meant. "My family's all about appearances," Arya said abruptly. "Success, status, the right schools, the right connections, the right everything. My sister's getting married next month to exactly the kind of man my mother always wanted her to marry. Old money, good name, perfect pedigree. They've been planning it for a year. It's going to be at my parents' estate, 300 guests, orchestra, designer, everything." She traced the rim of her coffee cup. "And I'm supposed to stand there and smile and pretend it's about love instead of a merger between two families. I'm supposed to wear the dress they picked and give the toast they approved and bring a date who fits the image they've created. And I can't—" Her voice cracked. "I can't do it. I can't stand in that room with those people and pretend anymore." Jonas waited. He'd learned that Arya needed silence to fill, not questions to answer. "So I come here instead," she continued, "twice a week. I sit across from someone who doesn't know my last name or what my family expects, or why I'm supposed to care about any of it. And for 45 minutes, I'm just Arya. Not the sterling daughter, not the disappointment, just a person drinking coffee and talking about fish funerals and 8-year-olds who believe their dads hung the moon." Sterling, the name registered like a bell Jonas had been trying not to hear. Sterling, as in Sterling Financial Group. Sterling, as in one of the most powerful investment families on the East Coast. Sterling, as in the reason Jonas had left his old life behind. Because he'd learned the hard way what happened when your worth was measured in market value instead of human terms. He should have known, should have put together the exhaustion and the family pressure and the desperate need for anonymity. Should have recognized that the only people who need to disappear this badly are the ones everyone wants a piece of. But he said nothing. Because if he acknowledged what he'd figured out, she'd know he knew. And then this fragile space they'd created would collapse. She'd become Arya Sterling instead of just Arya, and he'd become Jonas Mercer, who recognized her instead of Jonas, who shared her table twice a week. And they'd both lose the only place where they could be nobody. For what it's worth, Jonas said carefully, you seem pretty good at being just Arya. She looked at him then, really looked, and something passed between them. Recognition, maybe, or gratitude, or the shared understanding of two people who'd both learned that sometimes the greatest kindness is not saying all the things you know. Thanks, Arya said softly. So do you, Hetz. The Tuesday before her sister's wedding, Arya didn't show up. Jonas sat in their corner booth from 2:30 until 3:45, his coffee going cold, his book unopened. He told himself there were 1,000 reasons she might miss their meeting. Work crisis, family obligation, something as simple as traffic, or a migraine, or a calendar conflict. But he knew better. He'd seen the way she'd been holding herself tighter over the past week, the way the dark circles under her eyes had deepened, the way she'd been drinking her coffee faster, like she was trying to squeeze every second from their time together before something ended. The wedding was in 4 days. Arya Sterling was probably being fitted for a dress she didn't want to wear and rehearsing a toast she didn't want to give, and navigating family expectations that were crushing her under their weight. And Jonas, who'd built his life around not getting involved in other people's problems, found himself worried. Thursday, he arrived at 2:15 instead of 2:30, ordered 2 coffees, both black, claimed their table and waited. She didn't come. At 3 o'clock, Jonas pulled out his phone and stared at it. They'd never exchanged numbers, never made plans beyond the unspoken Tuesday-Thursday agreement, never suggested meeting anywhere else or staying in touch between their cafe sessions. To contact her now would be crossing a line, would be admitting that this thing between them had become something more than two strangers sharing comfortable silence. He put his phone away. At 3:30, the bell above the door chimed. Arya walked in like she was forcing herself through each step. Different clothes this time, business casual, slacks and a blouse, hair styled instead of pulled back. She looked polished, put together, expensive. She looked miserable. "I'm sorry," she said, dropping into the chair across from him. No coffee, no book. Just her and the exhaustion that seemed to radiate from her like heat. "I couldn't get away earlier. Everything's been..." She pressed her hands against her face. "I shouldn't have come. I should be at the estate helping with final preparations, but I just needed..." "Coffee," Jonas said, sliding the second cup across the table. Black, still warm. Arya lowered her hands and stared at the cup like he'd offered her salvation. "You waited." "Yeah. You didn't have to." "I know." She wrapped both hands around the coffee and took a long drink, and Jonas watched something in her shoulders finally unclench. They sat in silence for 5 minutes, 10, and slowly the person across from him stopped being Arya Sterling in business casual and started being just Arya again. "The wedding's Saturday," she finally said. "I know. How did you..." She stopped. "Right, I told you about it." "You did." Another silence. Arya turned the coffee cup in her hands. "I still don't have a date. Mother's been introducing me to suitable options all week. Men from the right families with the right backgrounds. Every single one of them talks about portfolios before they ask my name." She laughed, but it sounded broken. "She doesn't understand why I can't just pick one. Why I can't just show up with someone impressive and play my part." Jonas understood. Arya Sterling's +1 at her sister's wedding wouldn't be a date. It would be a statement. A signal about her priorities, her choices, her place in the family hierarchy. Bringing the wrong person would be a rebellion. Bringing no one would be a failure. Either way, she couldn't win. "What if," Jonas heard himself say, You brought someone completely unexpected? Arya looked up. What? Someone who doesn't fit. Someone your mother would never approve of. Someone who makes it absolutely clear that you're not playing by their rules anymore. He met her eyes. Someone like me. The words hung between them like a challenge. Jonas couldn't believe he'd said them out loud, couldn't believe he was offering to walk into exactly the kind of situation he'd spent 2 years avoiding, a room full of wealthy people and their judgment, cameras and questions, the risk of being recognized. But Arya was staring at him like he'd just offered to slay a dragon, and Jonas realized with uncomfortable clarity that he meant it, that for this person who'd given him 45 minutes of peace twice a week without asking for anything in return, he'd willingly walk back into the fire. Jonas, you don't... Arya's voice was shaking. You don't know what you're offering. My family, that world. It's not kind to people who don't fit. They'll judge you. They'll dismiss you. They'll make assumptions and comments, and they won't even try to hide it because people like that believe they're entitled to their opinions about everyone else. I know exactly what I'm offering, Jonas said quietly. I've been in rooms like that before. I know how they work. And I'm telling you that if you want someone in your corner on Saturday, someone who doesn't care about impressing your mother or networking with your father's colleagues, someone who's there because you asked, I'll do it. Arya's eyes were bright with something that might have been tears. Why? Because you've given me Tuesdays and Thursdays for 3 weeks and never once asked me why I needed them. Because you understand what it's like to need somewhere to hide. Because Jonas stopped, then decided to just say it. Because I think you could use a friend, and I know I could too. For a long moment, Arya just looked at him. Then she reached across the table and squeezed his hand once, quick and grateful. Okay, she whispered. Okay. Thank you. They sat there for another hour, long past Jonas's usual pickup time. He texted his neighbor to grab Lily from school. Emergency, would explain later, please. They didn't talk about the wedding again. Didn't plan what he'd wear, or how they'd handle her family, or what story they'd tell about how they met. Instead, they just sat together in their corner booth while the cafe grew busy with the after-work crowd. And Jonas held Arya's hand across the table and hoped like hell he hadn't just made the biggest mistake of his carefully reconstructed life. Friday morning, Jonas stood in front of his closet and confronted the reality of what he'd agreed to. The hangers held exactly 3 dress shirts, 2 pairs of slacks, and 1 suit, charcoal gray, bought on sale 4 years ago for a job interview that had never happened. He pulled the suit out and held it up to the morning light streaming through his bedroom window. The fabric was fine. Not expensive, but fine. Professional enough for a parent-teacher conference or a court appearance. Probably not fine enough for a sterling family wedding. Daddy, why are you holding your interview suit? Lily appeared in the doorway, still in her pajamas, her hair a wild tangle from sleep. I have to go to a wedding tomorrow, Jonas said, hanging the suit on the back of his door. I'm trying to figure out if this is appropriate. Whose wedding? A friend's sister. Lily tilted her head, considering this information with the seriousness of a judge reviewing evidence. Is your friend the coffee lady? Jonas turned to look at his daughter. What coffee lady? The one you think about on Tuesdays and Thursdays. You get this look on your face during breakfast like you're already gone even though you're still sitting there. Then you come home after pickup and you seem less... She waved her hand vaguely. Less like you're carrying something heavy. Jonas sat down on the edge of his bed, momentarily derailed by the observation. 8 years old, and she could read him like one of her library books. Yeah, he admitted. Her name is Arya. And yes, I met her at the cafe. Is she nice? Very nice. Then the suit is fine. Lily walked over and patted his knee with the confidence of someone who'd settled the matter. If she's really your friend, she won't care what you're wearing. And if she does care, then she's not really your friend and you shouldn't go to her sister's wedding anyway. That's very wise, Jonas said. I know. Lily headed back toward the kitchen. Can we have waffles for breakfast? We had pancakes 3 days ago. Waffles are structurally different from pancakes, Daddy. They have little squares that hold the syrup. That's engineering, not repetition. Jonas followed his daughter into their small kitchen, thinking about how she'd somehow grown up when he wasn't looking. How she'd learned to see through his careful pretending, to notice when he was carrying weight and when someone had helped him set it down. How she'd absorbed the lesson he'd been trying to teach her, that kindness mattered more than appearances, and was now teaching it back to him. He made waffles. Lily drowned hers in syrup and told him about the book she was reading where dragons lived in a library and protected stories instead of gold. Jonas listened and tried not to think about tomorrow, about walking into a world he'd deliberately left behind, about the risk he was taking for someone he'd known for less than a month. But mostly, he thought about Arya's face when he'd offered, the way she'd looked at him like he'd handed her a lifeline instead of just a date to an uncomfortable family obligation. The way her hand had felt in his, desperate and grateful and trusting in a way that made his chest ache. He'd walked away from a lot of things when his marriage ended. Wealth, status, the identity he'd built over 15 years. But he'd held on to one principle. When someone needed help and you could give it, you gave it. No calculations, no weighing costs and benefits. Just help because help was needed and you were capable. Tomorrow he'd put that principle to the test in a room full of people who'd forgotten it ever existed. After breakfast, Jonas walked Lily to school and then drove to the one decent men's store in their neighborhood. The kind of place that sold suits to high school seniors going to prom and young professionals buying their first interview outfit. The sales associate was maybe 23, wearing a name tag that said Kevin, and he took one look at Jonas's jeans and old sweater and made exactly the kind of assumptions Jonas had gotten used to over the past 2 years. "Can I help you find something?" Kevin's tone was polite, professional, and completely disinterested. "I need a suit for a wedding," Jonas said. "Tomorrow, something appropriate for black tie." Kevin's eyebrows lifted slightly. "Black tie is typically tuxedos, sir. We don't rent formal wear, but I can show you our suit selection. I'm not looking to rent, I need to buy." Jonas pulled out his wallet, extracting one of the credit cards he'd kept active for emergencies. Not the platinum card that had once given him access to private lounges and concierge services. Just a regular card with a reasonable limit. "What do you have that would work?" 15 minutes later, Jonas stood in front of a three-way mirror wearing a navy suit that fit better than anything he'd owned in years. Kevin had turned out to be surprisingly competent once he'd realized Jonas was serious, pulling together a complete outfit, suit, shirt, tie, shoes, with the efficiency of someone who actually enjoyed his job. "This works," Kevin said, adjusting the jacket's shoulders. "The navy is versatile. The cut is modern without being trendy. With the white shirt and this tie," he held up a silk tie in deep blue, "you'll fit in anywhere from a garden party to a cathedral wedding." Jonas looked at himself in the mirror. The suit was good, better than good. It made him look like someone who had his life together, someone who belonged in rooms with crystal chandeliers and string quartets. Someone who wasn't a single dad living paycheck to paycheck in a two-bedroom apartment with unreliable heating. Someone he used to be. "I'll take it," Jonas said. The total came to just under $800. Jonas handed over his card and tried not to think about how that represented most of his carefully maintained emergency fund. Tried not to calculate how many grocery trips or school supplies or unexpected car repairs he was gambling on this one evening. Kevin processed the payment and carefully packed everything into a garment bag. "Big wedding?" he asked conversationally. "Something like that." "Well, you'll look great. Whoever she is, she's lucky." Jonas accepted the garment bag and the shoebox. "Thanks." He drove home with his purchases hanging in the back seat and his stomach in knots. This was insane. He was spending money he didn't have to attend a wedding for people he'd never met, all because a woman he'd known for 3 weeks had looked at him with desperate eyes and asked for help. Except that wasn't quite true. Arya hadn't asked for help. She'd shared her pain, and Jonas had offered assistance because that's what decent people did. And then she'd tried to talk him out of it, tried to protect him from the judgment and the scrutiny. And he'd insisted anyway because somewhere in the past 3 weeks, these Tuesday-Thursday meetings had stopped being about comfortable silence and started being about actual friendship. Real friendship. The kind where you showed up even when it was hard. Jonas carried the garment bag inside and hung it carefully in his closet next to his old interview suit. 2 suits now. A whole wardrobe of options for events he never attended and places he no longer went. Tomorrow, that would change. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Jonas?" It's Arya. I got your number from the cafe's customer loyalty list. I hope that's okay. I know this is last minute, but I wanted to make sure you have the address. The wedding starts at 4 o'clock p.m. 4 p.m. I can pick you up at 2:30 if that works. We should arrive together. Jonas stared at the message. Arya Sterling had tracked down his phone number through the cafe's customer records, which meant she'd either asked the barista or, more likely, had access to systems and databases that most people didn't. Reminded him again exactly who she was and what world she came from. He typed back, "Address works. I'll drive myself and meet you there at 3:45. Might be easier." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, "Are you sure? It's a bit of a drive. The estate is in Greenwich." Greenwich? Of course. Where else would the Sterling family hold a wedding but in one of the wealthiest zip codes in Connecticut? "I'm sure. Send me the address." "Thank you, Jonas. For all of this. For all of... I know what I'm asking. See you tomorrow." Jonas set his phone down and walked to his bedroom window. Outside, the afternoon sun illuminated their quiet street, modest houses, older cars, kids riding bikes on the sidewalk. His world. The one he'd chosen when he'd walked away from everything else. Tomorrow, he'd step back into the other world. Temporarily. Just long enough to stand beside Arya while she faced her family. Just long enough to be the shield she needed against their judgment and expectations. Then he'd come home. Back to Lily and waffles and the apartment with unreliable heating. Back to being Jonas Mercer, single dad, nobody special. The thought should have been comforting. Instead, it felt like he was trying to convince himself of something he wasn't sure he believed anymore. Saturday arrived with the kind of perfect autumn weather that made people believe in divine timing. Clear blue sky, temperature in the mid-60s, leaves just beginning to turn gold and red on the trees. Jonas dropped Lily off at his neighbor's house for an overnight stay. Mrs. Chen, retired teacher, adored Lily, asked no questions when Jonas said he had an event to attend. "You look very handsome," Mrs. Chen said approvingly when she opened her door. "Important occasion?" Something like that. Jonas kissed Lily goodbye, reminded her to behave, promised he'd pick her up tomorrow morning. "Have fun, Daddy," Lily said, hugging him tight. Then quieter, "Don't let anyone make you feel small." Jonas pulled back to look at his daughter. "Where did you hear that?" "Nowhere. I just know people sometimes try to make other people feel small when they're in fancy places." "You're not small. You're my dad and you're the best." Jonas's throat tightened. "I love you, kid." "Love you too. Now go, so you're not late." The drive to Greenwich took 90 minutes through Saturday traffic. Jonas followed the GPS directions through increasingly wealthy neighborhoods, larger houses, manicured lawns, stone walls, and iron gates. By the time he reached the address Arya had sent, the properties had spread out so far that you couldn't see one house from the next. The Sterling estate sat behind a gate with an actual guardhouse. Jonas pulled up to the security station and rolled down his window. "Name?" The guard was professional, clipboard in hand. "Jonas Mercer. I'm a guest of Arya Sterling." The guard scanned his list, found Jonas's name, and nodded. "Follow the drive to the main house. Parking attendants will direct you. The ceremony is in the south garden." The gate swung open. Jonas drove through and got his first real look at the world Arya had been hiding from. The drive wound through manicured grounds that probably employed a full-time groundskeeping staff. Past tennis courts and a pool house. Past what looked like a greenhouse. Past an actual fountain with stone angels. The main house rose ahead like something out of a period drama. White columns, brick facade, windows that probably cost more than Jonas's entire apartment building. This wasn't wealth. This was dynasty. A young man in a vest and bow tie directed Jonas to a parking area where Teslas and Mercedes and Bentleys sat in neat rows. Jonas's 8-year-old Honda Civic looked like it had wandered onto the lot by mistake. He parked, checked his reflection in the rearview mirror one final time, and stepped out into the world he'd left behind. The navy suit looked good. Kevin had been right about that. But as Jonas walked toward the main house, following signs toward the south garden, he felt the familiar weight of being assessed and dismissed settling over his shoulders. Other guests moved in clusters, women in designer dresses and heels, men in tuxedos and custom suits, everyone radiating the casual confidence of people who belonged in places like this. No one looked at Jonas, or rather, they looked through him. The quick glance that categorized him as someone's accountant or lawyer, or maybe a vendor who'd been given guest access. Not someone worth knowing, not someone important. Jonas had forgotten how much he hated that feeling. Jonas! He turned to find Arya hurrying toward him across the lawn, and for a moment he forgot to breathe. She wore a dress the color of champagne, simple and elegant, her hair styled in loose waves around her shoulders, heels that brought her almost to his height, makeup that hadn't been there during their cafe meetings, making her eyes luminous and her lips defined. She looked beautiful. She looked expensive. She looked like Arya Sterling instead of just Arya. But when she reached him, slightly breathless, the expression on her face was pure relief. "You came," she said. "I said I would." "I know, but I was terrified you'd get here and take one look at this place and run for your life." Arya gestured at the estate grounds. "I wouldn't blame you. I've been trying to run for years." Jonas smiled despite his nerves. "It's very excessive, pretentious, a monument to accumulated wealth and social climbing." I was going to say impressive. "That's because you're kind." Arya linked her arm through his, and Jonas felt some of his tension ease at the familiar gesture. "Come on, I'll introduce you to my family before the ceremony starts. Get the worst part over with." They walked together across the lawn toward a terrace where guests mingled with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Jonas could feel the stares now, the subtle shifts in conversation, as people noticed Arya Sterling arriving with an unknown date, the whispers starting like ripples across still water. "That's my mother," Arya said quietly, nodding toward a woman holding court near the terrace steps. "Victoria Sterling, steel spine, ice water in her veins, could negotiate with dictators and win. Try not to let her intimidate you." "I'll do my best." "And that's my father with her, Robert Sterling. Quieter than mother, but just as ruthless when it comes to family reputation. They've been married 35 years, and I think they've had maybe 3 conversations that weren't about business or social standing." Victoria Sterling looked exactly like Jonas had imagined. Tall, perfectly coiffed, wearing a dress that probably cost more than his car. She saw them approaching, and her expression shifted through several calculations in the span of a heartbeat. Surprise, confusion, displeasure, then smooth neutrality. "Arya, darling." Victoria's voice was warm honey over cold steel. "So glad you could join us. I was beginning to worry." "Mother, father." Arya squeezed Jonas's arm once, then released it to face her parents. "I'd like you to meet my guest. This is Jonas Mercer." Jonas extended his hand to Robert Sterling, who shook it with the firm grip of a man who'd been trained in power dynamics since birth. "Mr. Sterling, thank you for having me." "Of course." Robert's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Any friend of Arya's is welcome. How do you two know each other?" "We met at a cafe," Arya said before Jonas could respond. "We've been meeting there for coffee the past few weeks. Jonas has become a good friend." Victoria's eyes sharpened. "A cafe? How quaint." Her gaze swept over Jonas's suit, assessing and dismissing in one practiced look. "And what do you do, Mr. Mercer?" "I work in consulting," Jonas said, using the vague description he'd perfected for situations like this. True enough, he did occasional freelance work helping small businesses with strategy. Vague enough to avoid follow-up questions. "Consulting." Victoria repeated the word like she was tasting something slightly off. "How interesting. And you live—" "Mother," Arya interrupted firmly, "Jonas is my guest, not a job applicant. Maybe we could save the interview for another time." Victoria's smile turned glacial. "Of course, darling. I was simply making conversation." She turned to Jonas. "Please do enjoy the wedding, Mr. Mercer. I'm sure it will be quite memorable." The dismissal was clear. Jonas felt himself being categorized and filed away as irrelevant, not worth further attention. It should have bothered him, should have triggered the old anger at being judged and found wanting based on nothing but appearances. Instead, he found himself watching Arya's face and recognizing the exhaustion there. The way her shoulders had tensed the moment her mother started speaking. The careful neutrality of her expression that hid what Jonas now knew was frustration and hurt. This was her life. These people, this place, these constant assessments and judgments. Every day, not just Tuesdays and Thursdays. Come on, Arya said quietly, taking his arm again. Let me show you the garden before everyone sits down. They escaped into the crowd, Arya nodding at people who called her name but not stopping to make introductions. Jonas followed her lead, acutely aware of the looks they were drawing, the conversations that paused as they passed. I'm sorry, Arya said when they'd found a relatively quiet corner near the garden entrance. That was awful. My mother she's protective of you, Jonas said carefully. She's obsessed with appearances and control. Arya's voice was tight. She sees people as either assets or liabilities. You're a liability because you don't come from the right family or have the right connections or fit the image she's created of who her daughter should associate with. Arya, no, you should know what you walked into. You should understand that people like my mother will judge you and dismiss you and treat you like you don't matter. And there's nothing I can do about it except stand here and tell you that you matter to me. That you're the best friend I've had in years. That you're brave and kind and good. And if she can't see that, it's her failing, not yours. Jonas looked at this woman, fierce and frustrated and fighting back tears in the middle of her sister's wedding, and felt something shift in his chest, something that went beyond friendship, beyond their Tuesday-Thursday arrangement, beyond comfortable silences over coffee. Something dangerous. Hey, he said softly. I signed up for this, remember? I knew what I was walking into, and I'm not going anywhere. Arya stared at him for a long moment, then nodded once, sharp and decisive. Okay, thank you. Music started playing from the garden, a string quartet warming up. Guests began moving toward the rows of white chairs arranged before an elaborate floral arch. The ceremony was starting. Jonas and Arya found seats near the back, careful not to draw more attention. Around them, people settled in with the rustle of expensive fabric and quiet conversations. Jonas recognized the atmosphere, that particular blend of obligation and performance that defined high society events. Everyone was here to be seen being here, to make connections and alliances, to play their part in the ongoing theater of wealth and status. The processional began. Bridesmaids in rose-colored dresses walking down the aisle in careful rhythm. Then the bride, Arya's sister, blonde and beautiful and beaming in a dress that probably cost what Jonas earned in 6 months. She looked happy, genuinely happy. Maybe some marriages in this world worked out. The groom waited at the altar in a perfect tuxedo, his face arranged in practiced composure. Marcus Wellington, Jonas remembered. Old money. Good family. Perfect pedigree. Exactly the kind of match Victoria Sterling would have orchestrated. The ceremony began with traditional vows and readings. Jonas watched the couple at the altar and tried to remember if he'd ever looked that confident on his wedding day, that certain about the future he was stepping into. Probably. He'd been young and successful and convinced that love plus wealth equaled happiness. He'd been wrong. Beside him, Arya sat very still, hands folded in her lap, face carefully neutral. But Jonas could feel the tension radiating from her, could see the way her jaw was clenched, could sense the effort it took for her to sit here and watch this performance. He reached over and took her hand, just held it, not saying anything, not making a show of it, just contact, just presence, just, I'm here. Arya's fingers tightened around his. She didn't look at him, didn't acknowledge the gesture beyond that squeeze, but some of the tension in her shoulders eased. They sat like that through the rest of the ceremony, hands linked, watching two people promise forever while surrounded by 300 witnesses who would hold them to every word. When the officiant pronounced them married and the couple kissed, the guests applauded with appropriate enthusiasm. Jonas applauded too, played his part, smiled at the happy couple, acted like he belonged. But the whole time he was acutely aware of Arya's hand in his, and the way she held on like he was the only real thing in a room full of carefully constructed illusions. The reception line formed immediately after the ceremony, guests filing past the newlyweds and their families to offer congratulations and well wishes. Jonas found himself standing beside Arya in a slow-moving queue, watching as person after person greeted the bride and groom with practiced warmth and perfect etiquette. We could skip this, Jonas murmured to Arya. Just head straight to the reception. Can't. Mother would notice. She notices everything. Arya kept her voice low. Besides, I should congratulate my sister, even if this whole thing makes me want to run screaming. The line inched forward. Jonas watched Victoria Sterling work the crowd like a conductor leading an orchestra, guiding conversations, making introductions, ensuring everything proceeded according to her exact specifications. Robert Sterling stood beside her like a monument to quiet authority, shaking hands and offering measured smiles. Finally, they reached the bride. Arya, the sister, her name was Elena, Jonas remembered, pulled Arya into a hug that looked genuinely affectionate. I'm so glad you're here. I know you hate these things, but it means everything that you came. Of course I came. Arya pulled back, smiling. You look beautiful, Elena. Really. Congratulations. Thank you. Elena turned to Jonas, curiosity bright in her eyes. And you must be Arya's mysterious +1. I've heard absolutely nothing about you, which means you must be important. Jonas shook her hand. Jonas Mercer, nice to meet you. Elena Wellington now, I suppose. She glanced at her new husband with obvious affection. Still getting used to that. How do you and Arya know each other? We met at a cafe, Jonas said, sticking to the agreed-upon story. She saved me from drinking truly terrible coffee alone. Elena laughed. That sounds like Arya. She's always rescuing things. Stray cats, bad situations, people who look like they need a friend. She squeezed Arya's hand. Thank you for coming, and for bringing a date who actually looks at you like you matter, not like you're a networking opportunity. Something passed between the sisters, understanding, affection, shared history. Then Victoria's voice cut through the moment. Elena, darling, there are still quite a few guests waiting. Right, sorry. Elena gave them both one more smile. Find me later? I want to hear about this cafe. They moved past the bride to the groom. Marcus Wellington had the kind of face that belonged in country club portraits. Strong jaw, perfect teeth, eyes that calculated even when he smiled. He shook Arya's hand with practiced charm. Arya, good to see you. Congratulations, Marcus. Arya's voice was polite, nothing more. Marcus turned to Jonas, and something flickered in his expression too fast to read. And you are? Jonas Mercer. They shook hands. Marcus's grip was firm, confident, holding on just a beat too long while his eyes searched Jonas's face. Looking for something, finding it or not finding it, Jonas couldn't tell. Mercer, Marcus repeated slowly. Have we met before? I don't think so, Jonas said evenly. Marcus released his hand but continued staring. You look familiar. Did you work in tech, finance? Consulting, Jonas said, fighting the urge to step back. Small business strategy. Interesting. Marcus's tone suggested it was anything but. Well, enjoy the reception. They moved away, finally free of the receiving line, and Jonas felt Arya's hand find his again. That was weird, she said quietly. Marcus looking at you like that. Maybe I have one of those faces. But Jonas felt uneasy. Marcus Wellington had been searching for recognition, trying to place him, which meant there was a chance, small but real, that he might eventually remember where he'd seen Jonas before. Not as Jonas Mercer, as Jay Vale. The name Jonas had buried along with his old life, the identity that had made him wealthy and miserable and eventually cost him everything that mattered. Come on, Arya said, leading him toward the reception tent. Let's get drinks and find a corner to hide in until dinner. The tent was spectacular. White silk draped from the ceiling, crystal chandeliers, round tables dressed in gold and rose linens. A dance floor occupied the center, and a jazz quartet played softly near a stage. Waiters circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Everything glowed with that particular polish that only serious money could buy. Jonas accepted a champagne flute and tried to look comfortable. Around them, guests mingled and laughed and discussed things that people discussed at wealthy weddings, vacation homes and market trends, and whose children had been accepted to which prestigious schools. Arya Sterling, is that you? A woman in a black cocktail dress materialized beside them, all predatory friendliness. Jonas recognized the type immediately. Social climber, always working the room, always collecting connections like trading cards. Vanessa, Arya's smile was tight. How are you? Wonderful, darling. This wedding is just gorgeous. Your mother outdid herself. Vanessa's eyes slid to Jonas with obvious interest. And who is this handsome stranger? Jonas Mercer, Arya said before Jonas could respond. Jonas, this is Vanessa Hartley. We went to boarding school together. How lovely. Vanessa offered her hand in a way that suggested Jonas should kiss it rather than shake it. He shook it. And what do you do, Jonas? Consulting. Oh? The single syllable dripped with false interest and genuine dismissal. What kind of consulting? The boring kind, Jonas said pleasantly. Business strategy, very technical, puts most people to sleep. I'm sure you're being modest. Vanessa turned back to Arya, already losing interest in Jonas now that he'd been categorized as socially unimportant. Arya, you simply must tell me where you found that dress. Is it vintage? They spent 5 excruciating minutes discussing fashion and mutual acquaintances while Jonas stood there holding his champagne and wondering how Arya survived this world on a regular basis. Every conversation was a transaction, every interaction a calculation. Nothing was simple, nothing was real. Finally, Vanessa spotted someone more important across the tent and made her excuses. The moment she was gone, Arya's shoulders sagged. I'm sorry, she said. That's everyone here. Surface level everything. Genuine connection nowhere. It's fine, Jonas said. But it wasn't, really. He'd forgotten how exhausting this was, how much energy it took to maintain the appropriate face, to answer the same questions with the same vague responses, to be assessed and dismissed over and over by people who measured worth in bank accounts and pedigree. They found their assigned seats, table 12, near enough to see the head table but far enough to avoid scrutiny. Other guests joined them, a couple in their 50s who owned a private equity firm, a younger woman who worked in fashion, and 2 men who spent the entire pre-dinner conversation discussing cryptocurrency investments. Jonas participated just enough to be polite, answering questions about his work with practiced vagueness, deflecting anything too personal. Beside him, Arya navigated her own conversations with the weary expertise of someone who'd been doing this her entire life. Dinner was served, 5 courses, each more elaborate than the last. Jonas ate slowly, listening to table conversation that ranged from superficial to borderline offensive. The private equity husband made a joke about the pores that everyone laughed at except Jonas and Arya. The fashion woman complained about her assistant forgetting to pack the right shoes for a trip to Milan. The cryptocurrency investors debated which Caribbean island had the best tax shelters. Real problems. Real concerns. The struggles of people who'd never worried about rent or grocery bills or whether they could afford their child's field trip fee. Jonas felt his jaw tighten. Arya noticed, of course she noticed, and placed her hand on his knee under the table. Gentle pressure. Solidarity. They survived dinner. Barely. The toast began as dessert was cleared. Robert Sterling praising his daughter's grace and beauty, Victoria speaking about family legacy and the Wellington-Sterling union, Elena's maid of honor telling embarrassing stories that were probably carefully vetted for appropriateness. Then it was Arya's turn. She stood, champagne glass in hand, and for a moment Jonas saw real fear flash across her face. Then she took a breath, squared her shoulders, and spoke. Elena has always been the good daughter, Arya began, and nervous laughter rippled through the tent. The one who followed the rules, made the right choices, never caused mother stress or father concern. She's perfect. And I've spent most of my life being jealous of that perfection while simultaneously being grateful someone was doing it right so I didn't have to. More laughter, but this time it sounded surprised, uncertain where Arya was going with this. But watching Elena today, seeing her marry Marcus, I realized something. Arya's voice grew stronger. Perfection isn't about following rules or meeting expectations. It's about finding someone who sees you, really sees you, and chooses you anyway. Someone who makes you feel safe enough to be honest, vulnerable enough to be real. Someone who doesn't care about your pedigree or your portfolio or your potential, just about you. Arya's eyes found Jonas across the tent, held his gaze. That's what I hope Elena and Marcus have found in each other. That's what I hope we all find someday. That one person who matters more than everything else. She raised her glass. To Elena and Marcus, may you always see each other clearly. The tent erupted in applause. Arya sat down quickly, her cheeks flushed, refusing to look at anyone. Jonas reached over and squeezed her hand under the table. That was perfect, he said quietly. That was terrifying, Arya whispered back. Mother's going to kill me later. Worth it? Maybe. The band struck up music for the first dance. Marcus and Elena took the floor while guests watched with champagne and approval. They moved well together, practiced and confident, like they'd been preparing for this performance. When the song ended, other couples joined them, filling the dance floor with designer gowns and expensive tuxedos. Dance with me? Arya asked, surprising Jonas. I should warn you I'm not very good. Neither am I. Come on. They moved to the edge of the dance floor where the lighting was softer, where they could blend into the crowd. Jonas took Arya's hand, placed his other hand on her waist, and tried to remember the basic steps his mother had taught him decades ago. They swayed more than danced, staying in their small corner of space while around them more skilled couples glided past. Thank you for being here, Arya said, her voice nearly lost in the music. For all of this. I know it's been awful. It hasn't been that bad. Jonas, your table companion made a joke about poor people. Okay, parts have been awful, Jonas admitted, but parts have been good too. Your toast was incredible. Elena seemed genuinely happy to see you, and he paused. You were right earlier. You matter to me too. Arya looked up at him, and in the soft lighting, she was just Arya again. Not Sterling, not the disappointment daughter, just the woman he'd met in a cafe 3 weeks ago who'd asked if he ever needed to be somewhere nobody knew his name. Jonas, she started, then stopped, started again. I think I need to tell you something. Excuse me. They both turned. Marcus Wellington stood beside them, his expression odd, determined and uncertain at the same time. I'm sorry to interrupt, Marcus said, though he clearly wasn't. His eyes were fixed on Jonas with uncomfortable intensity. But I finally figured out where I know you from, and I think we need to talk. The music continued around them, but Jonas heard nothing except the rushing of blood in his ears. Marcus Wellington stood there with his hand extended toward the edge of the dance floor, away from the crowd, his expression a mixture of certainty and something that looked almost like reverence. This was it. The moment Jonas had been dreading since he'd agreed to come here. The moment his carefully constructed anonymity shattered. I don't think we need to talk, Jonas said evenly, keeping his voice low. You're mistaken. I'm not. Marcus's voice was equally quiet but firm. 5 years ago, my company was 3 weeks from bankruptcy. We'd lost our primary investor, the board was voting to liquidate, and I was 28 years old watching everything I'd built fall apart. Then an anonymous investor appeared, no face-to-face meetings, all communication through lawyers, and bought enough equity to keep us afloat. Asked for nothing except a silent partnership and complete discretion. Arya's hand tightened on Jonas's arm. Around them, other dancers continued their choreographed movements, oblivious to the conversation unfolding at the floor's edge. That investor saved my company, Marcus continued. More than that, he saved my life. I spent years trying to find him, trying to thank him properly. His lawyers wouldn't reveal his identity, said he valued privacy above all else. The only name I ever heard was Jay Vale. The name hung in the air between them like an accusation. Jonas felt Arya go very still beside him, felt the moment she connected the pieces, felt her realization land like a physical blow. You're mistaken, Jonas repeated, but his voice lacked conviction now. I saw a photo once, Marcus said. Just one. Taken from a distance at some tech conference. The lawyers sent it by accident in an email chain. I recognized you the moment you walked through the receiving line, but I couldn't believe it. Jay Vale, the ghost investor, the man who saved my company and then vanished, standing at Elena's wedding with Arya Sterling. Marcus. Jonas's jaw tightened. This isn't the time or place. You're right. It's not. Marcus glanced at the dance floor, at his new bride spinning with her father, at the guests who'd started to notice their conversation. But I need you to know that I owe you everything. My company, my reputation, my ability to stand here today and marry the woman I love, All of it exists because you chose to help a stranger when no one else would. I didn't do it for gratitude, Jonas said quietly. I know, that's why it mattered. Marcus pulled a business card from his pocket and pressed it into Jonas's hand. I won't tell anyone. I understand why you disappeared, but if you ever need anything, anything at all, I want you to know that I'm here. You saved me once. Let me return the favor someday. He walked away before Jonas could respond, melting back into the crowd of dancers and guests. Jonas stood frozen, the business card burning in his palm, acutely aware of Arya standing beside him like a statue. Arya, he started. Not here. Her voice was very quiet, very controlled. Not in front of everyone. She walked away from the dance floor, moving quickly through the tent toward the terrace doors. Jonas followed, his heart hammering, knowing that everything was about to fall apart, but unable to stop it. They emerged onto a stone terrace overlooking the estate gardens, fairy lights strung through the trees, the sound of the reception muffled behind them. Arya turned to face him, and Jonas saw the exact moment her careful composure cracked. Jay Vale, she said. Not a question, a statement. You're Jay Vale. It's complicated. Complicated? Arya's voice rose. You're one of the most successful anonymous investors in tech. You walked away from billions 3 years ago and disappeared so completely that people still write articles speculating about where you went. And you've been sitting across from me in a cafe for 3 weeks, drinking terrible coffee, pretending to be nobody special? I wasn't pretending, Jonas said urgently. Jonas Mercer is my real name. I legally changed it back after the divorce. Jay Vale it was a name I used for business, a way to separate my personal life from the investments. It didn't work. Didn't work? Arya repeated flatly. You mean it didn't protect you from becoming famous and wealthy and powerful? I mean it didn't protect me from becoming someone I hated. Jonas took a step toward her and stopped when she stepped back. The money, the status, the influence, it destroyed my marriage. It destroyed my relationship with my daughter. Everyone wanted something from Jay Vale. No one cared about Jonas. So you just disappeared? Walked away from everything? I walked away from a life that was killing me. Jonas's voice was raw. My ex-wife didn't love me. She loved what I could provide. My colleagues didn't respect me. They respected my portfolio. My friends weren't friends. They were networking contacts. I woke up one day and realized I'd spent 15 years building a fortune and I was the loneliest person alive. Arya wrapped her arms around herself, staring at him like she was seeing a stranger. Why didn't you tell me? Because I knew this would happen. I knew the second you found out, everything would change. You'd stop seeing Jonas who drinks bad coffee and picks his daughter up from school. You'd start seeing Jay Vale with his billions and his influence and his ability to save failing companies with a single phone call. And I was right. Look at you. You're looking at me differently right now. Of course I'm looking at you differently. Arya's voice cracked. I trusted you. I told you things I haven't told anyone. I brought you here, to my family, because I thought you understood what it was like to be judged and dismissed based on appearances. I defended you to my mother, and the whole time you were lying to me. I never lied. You let me believe you were someone you're not. That's the same thing. Arya pressed her hands against her face, and when she lowered them, tears tracked through her makeup. I sat across from you and told you about my family's obsession with wealth and status and connections, and you said nothing. You let me complain about my privileged life to someone who's probably wealthier than my parents. Do you have any idea how that feels? Arya, please. No. She held up a hand. I need you to understand something. I brought you here because I thought you were real. Because I thought you were someone who'd chosen substance over status, who understood that wealth doesn't equal worth. But you're not that person. You're just better at hiding than the rest of them. The words hit like physical blows. Jonas felt something inside him crack. Felt the careful distance he'd maintained from his old life collapse. That's not fair. I chose to walk away. I gave up everything to rebuild a life that actually meant something. You gave up nothing. Arya's voice was ice. You gave up money you can afford to lose. You still have options I'll never have. You can walk into any room and know that if people discovered who you really are, They'd fall over themselves to impress you. I can't escape my family name. I can't change who I am. But you? You get to play pretend whenever it's convenient. It's not pretend, Jonas said desperately. Jonas Mercer is who I am now. The money's in trusts for Lily. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment and work freelance consulting to pay rent. I'm not playing anything. You're playing at being normal, Arya interrupted. You're slumming it in cafes and cheap apartments because you can, because you know there's a safety net underneath if things get hard. That's not the same as actually struggling. That's just... She made a frustrated gesture. That's just poverty tourism for the wealthy. That's not what this is. Then what is it? Arya demanded. Why did you really come here tonight? Was it kindness, or was it curiosity about seeing how the other half lives again? Jonas stared at her, stunned by the accusation. I came because you asked me to, because you needed someone in your corner and I wanted to be that person. Because somewhere over the past 3 weeks, you became the first real friend I've had in years. That hasn't changed. Everything has changed, Arya's voice rose. Don't you see that? I can't look at you now without wondering what else you're hiding. I can't trust that anything you've told me is true. You said you understood what it was like to need anonymity, but you don't. You chose invisibility. I'm suffocating under visibility. Those aren't the same thing. Behind them, the terrace doors opened. Victoria Sterling emerged, her expression glacial as she took in the scene. Her daughter crying, Jonas standing there helplessly, the obvious signs of an argument. Arya, Victoria said sharply. Guests are asking about you. This is your sister's wedding. Pull yourself together and get back inside. Mother, not now. Now. Victoria's voice cut like a knife. Whatever is happening here can be dealt with later. Right now you have obligations. Arya looked between her mother and Jonas, something crumbling in her expression. Then she straightened her shoulders, wiped at her eyes, and walked past both of them back into the tent without another word. Jonas started to follow, but Victoria stepped into his path. Mr. Mercer, she said, examining him with new interest. Or should I say Mr. Vale? Yes, Marcus told me. He thought I should know exactly who my daughter brought as her guest. Her smile was razor sharp. Imagine my surprise to learn that the man I dismissed as a nobody is actually someone quite significant. Mrs. Sterling, I misjudged you, Victoria continued as if he hadn't spoken. And I rarely misjudge people. That's quite an achievement. Of course, now that I know who you are, I have several investment opportunities I'd love to discuss. My husband's firm is always looking for strategic partners, and someone with your track record... Stop. Jonas's voice was flat. This is exactly why I changed my name. Why I walked away. Because the moment people know who Jay Vale is, they stop seeing the person and start seeing the opportunity. You dismissed me when you thought I was ordinary. Now you're courting me because you think I'm useful. Neither version has anything to do with who I actually am. Victoria's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in her eyes. The world runs on usefulness, Mr. Vale. The sooner you remember that, the better. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a wedding to manage and a daughter to repair. She swept back inside, leaving Jonas alone on the terrace with the party sounds drifting through the closed doors and fairy lights twinkling in the garden below. He stood there for a long moment, Marcus's business card still clutched in his hand, feeling the full weight of what had just happened settle over him. His identity was exposed. Arya hated him, and despite his best efforts to stay hidden, Jay Vale had stepped back into the spotlight. Jonas pulled out his phone and texted his neighbor that he'd be picking Lily up earlier than planned. Then he walked around the side of the estate to the parking area, avoiding the main tent entirely. His Honda Civic sat among the luxury vehicles like an apology, and Jonas had never been more grateful for something ordinary in his life. He drove home through the darkening evening, hands tight on the wheel, replaying the confrontation with Arya over and over in his mind. Her accusation that he was playing at being normal, her anger at his deception, her tears that he'd caused by not trusting her with the truth from the beginning. She was right about some of it. He did have a safety net. He could access his money if he truly needed it, could return to his old life if circumstances demanded. That was a privilege most people didn't have, but she was wrong about his motivations. He hadn't walked away from wealth as an experiment or a performance. He'd fled because staying meant losing himself completely. Jonas had learned the hard way that you could have everything and still be empty. That wealth couldn't buy connection or meaning or peace. That the people who wanted Jay Vale's money rarely wanted Jonas Mercer's company. He'd chosen simplicity not because he was slumming, but because he was surviving. But explaining that to Arya now felt impossible. She'd trusted him with her vulnerability, and he'd kept his past hidden. That betrayal couldn't be reasoned away or justified, no matter how good his intentions had been. Mrs. Chen answered her door with Lily already packed and ready, her small overnight bag sitting by the entrance. "You're early," Mrs. Chen observed. "Everything all right?" "Change of plans," Jonas said, managing a smile. "Thanks for watching her." "Anytime." Mrs. Chen studied his face with the perception of someone who'd spent 40 years reading children and adults alike. Sometimes plans change for good reasons. Sometimes they change because we needed them to. Jonas nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Lily bounded over and hugged him tight, chattering about the movies she'd watched and the pizza they'd ordered. He carried her bag to the car and listened to her talk, grateful for the normalcy of her presence, the reminder of what mattered. "Did you have fun at the wedding?" Lily asked once they were driving home. "It was complicated," Jonas said honestly. "Complicated bad or complicated interesting?" "Both." Lily considered this. "Did you get to dance with the coffee lady?" "Her name is Arya, and yes, we danced." "Did she like your suit?" "I don't know," Jonas admitted. "We didn't really talk about the suit." "What did you talk about?" Jonas pulled up to a red light and looked at his daughter in the rear-view mirror. 8 years old and asking questions he didn't know how to answer. "We talked about trust," he said finally. "About whether keeping secrets is the same as lying. About what happens when people find out you're not who they thought you were." "That sounds sad," Lily said quietly. "Yeah," Jonas agreed. "It was pretty sad." They drove the rest of the way in silence. At home, Jonas helped Lily get ready for bed and read her 3 chapters of the Dragon Library book, voices and all, until she fell asleep mid-sentence. He sat there for a while afterward, watching her breathe, reminding himself why he'd made all the choices that led to this moment. Everything he'd done, leaving his marriage, walking away from his wealth, building a life from scratch, had been for her. So she could grow up with a father who was present instead of powerful, who measured success in moments instead of markets, who understood that being someone's dad mattered more than being someone important. But tonight had revealed the cost of those choices. The secrets he'd kept to protect his new life had damaged the first real friendship he'd found in years. And now Jonas had to decide whether holding on to his anonymity was worth losing the one person who'd understood why he needed it. He pulled out his phone and stared at Arya's contact information. Started typing a text 3 times and deleted it each time. What could he say? "Sorry I didn't tell you I used to be someone else?" "Sorry you're angry that I have money I choose not to spend?" "Sorry that knowing my real identity changes everything between us, even though I'm still the same person who sat across from you every Tuesday and Thursday?" None of it felt adequate. Jonas set his phone aside and walked to his bedroom window. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet. Modest houses with porch lights, cars parked in driveways, the occasional dog barking. His world, the one he'd chosen, the one where Jonas Mercer was just another single dad doing his best. But Jay Vale had slipped back in, and Jonas wasn't sure he could force him back out. The next morning arrived too bright and too early. Jonas made pancakes on autopilot while Lily complained about having to go back to school tomorrow after such a short weekend. He listened and responded appropriately and tried not to check his phone every 5 minutes to see if Arya had texted. She hadn't. Monday morning, he dropped Lily at school and drove to Brew and Page's even though it was Monday, not Tuesday. The cafe was busier than usual, morning commuters grabbing coffee on their way to work. Jonas ordered his usual and sat at their table, his and Arya's, and waited. She didn't come. Tuesday at 2:30, Jonas returned. The table was empty. He waited until 3:30, drinking cold coffee and rereading the same page of his book over and over. The barista, a college student named Sarah who'd worked there for 6 months, came over during a lull. "Your friend isn't coming," she said gently. "She was here this morning, asked me to give you this if you showed up." Sarah handed him a folded piece of paper. Jonas took it with hands that weren't quite steady. Sarah retreated to give him privacy. He unfolded the note. Arya's handwriting, neat and precise. Jonas, I need time to think. I'm not ready to see you yet. I know you probably think I'm overreacting, but this isn't just about the money or the name. It's about the fact that I built a friendship with someone I thought I understood, and now I don't know what was real and what wasn't. I don't know if the person I trusted still exists, or if he was just a character you were playing. I need to figure that out before we can talk again. Please respect that. Arya Jonas read the note 3 times. Then he folded it carefully and put it in his wallet, next to the business card Marcus had given him and the photo of Lily he carried everywhere. 3 things that represented 3 different versions of himself. The father, the investor, the friend. He thought he could keep them separate, thought he could choose which one to be in any given moment, but Saturday night had proved that impossible. The moment Jay Vale became visible, he consumed everything else. Jonas Mercer disappeared. The careful boundaries collapsed, and Jonas didn't know how to rebuild them. He returned to the cafe Thursday afternoon anyway, sat at their table, ordered their coffee, waited the full 45 minutes even though he knew she wouldn't come. It felt important to honor the ritual, to prove that his commitment to their friendship hadn't been conditional on anonymity. The cafe regulars noticed. The retired couple who shared scones asked if his friend was all right. The college students who studied in the corner gave him sympathetic looks. Even Sarah seemed worried, refilling his coffee without being asked. "She'll come back," Sarah said quietly during one refill. "People who matter always come back eventually." Jonas nodded but didn't believe it. He'd seen this pattern before. Once people discovered Jay Vale's identity, they either tried to use him for connections and influence, or they pulled away because the power imbalance made genuine friendship impossible. Either way, Jonas Mercer disappeared. Arya was pulling away. He couldn't blame her. He'd let her believe he was someone safe, someone ordinary, someone who understood struggling and rebuilding because he was doing it too. Then she'd discovered he was doing it by choice, not necessity. That he could stop pretending whenever he wanted. That changed everything. Friday afternoon, Jonas picked Lily up from school and took her for ice cream, something he only did for special occasions or when he needed to think. "What's wrong, Daddy?" Lily asked, around a mouthful of chocolate chip. "What makes you think something's wrong?" "You ordered vanilla. You always get coffee flavor. Vanilla means you're upset but trying to pretend you're not." Jonas looked at his daughter, too perceptive, too aware, carrying the burden of having a father who tried to protect her from adult problems but couldn't quite hide them successfully. "You're right," he admitted. "I am upset. My friend Arya, the coffee lady, she found out something about me that I should have told her from the beginning. Now she's angry and hurt, and I don't know how to fix it." "What did she find out?" Jonas hesitated, then decided Lily deserved honesty. She'd lived through enough secrets and half-truths during the divorce. She found out I used to have a different job, that I used to be someone kind of important and well-known. I didn't tell her because I was afraid it would change how she saw me. "Did it?" "Yeah," Jonas said quietly. "It did." Lily ate her ice cream thoughtfully for a moment. "When Emma found out you were my dad, she got weird for a few days." "What? Why?" "Because her mom had seen you picking me up and told Emma you were really handsome, and maybe Emma should invite me over for a play date so her mom could meet you." Lily rolled her eyes. "Emma was embarrassed and didn't want me to think she was only being my friend because her mom wanted to meet you, so she avoided me for a while." Jonas felt something twist in his chest. What happened? "I told her I didn't care why she wanted to be friends originally. I just cared that she was my friend now. That the beginning doesn't matter as much as what you do after." Lily looked at him seriously. "Maybe your coffee lady needs to hear that too. That who you were before doesn't change who you are now. And if she's really your friend, she'll figure that out." Out of the mouths of 8-year-olds, Jonas reached over and squeezed Lily's hand. "When did you get so wise?" "I've always been wise. You just don't listen enough." But she grinned, removing the sting from her words. They finished their ice cream and drove home through the Friday afternoon traffic. Jonas thought about what Lily had said, about beginnings versus middles, about judging people on who they were now instead of who they used to be. It was good advice, mature advice, the kind of wisdom that came from watching adults mess up relationships and learning from their mistakes. But Jonas wasn't sure it applied to his situation with Arya, because the problem wasn't just that he'd hidden his past, It was that his past gave him options and safety nets that fundamentally changed the nature of any struggle he claimed to understand. Arya was right about that. He was choosing simplicity. She was trapped in complexity. Those weren't equivalent experiences, no matter how much Jonas wanted them to be. Saturday morning, Jonas woke to his phone buzzing with notifications. He grabbed it groggily, expecting spam or maybe Mrs. Chen confirming next week's schedule. Instead, he found 17 missed calls from unfamiliar numbers, 12 text messages, and 6 voicemail notifications. His stomach dropped. The first text was from Marcus Wellington. "I'm so sorry. I didn't tell anyone, I swear. It must have leaked some other way. Call me if you need anything." The second was from a number he didn't recognize. "Mr. Vale, I'm a reporter with the Boston Globe. Would you be willing to comment on reports that you attended the Sterling Wellington wedding? Our sources indicate..." Jonas stopped reading. With shaking hands, he opened his browser and searched his name. The results made his blood run cold. Mysterious investor J. Vale. Spotted at Connecticut. Wedding. Sterling family wedding reveals. Secret guest. Reclusive tech millionaire J. Vale. Where has J. Vale been? Anonymous investor emerges after 3-year absence. The articles were everywhere. Someone at the wedding had recognized him or overheard Marcus's conversation. Someone had taken photos. Someone had contacted the press, and now his carefully constructed anonymity was burning down around him. Jonas scrolled through article after article, each one speculating about why he was there, who he'd been with, whether his appearance signaled a return to investing. Several mentioned Arya by name, noting that he'd been seen dancing with her, sitting at her table, arriving as her guest. His phone rang again. Another unknown number. Jonas declined the call and immediately dialed his lawyer, the one person from his old life he'd stayed in contact with for situations exactly like this. "Jonas?" David answered on the first ring. "I saw the articles. Are you okay?" "No," Jonas said honestly. "David, I need you to do damage control. Release a statement that I attended as a personal guest, that I'm not returning to active investing, that my private life remains private. Whatever it takes to make this stop." "I'll handle it," David said. "But Jonas, you need to prepare yourself. The articles are already going viral in finance circles. Your name is trending on social media. People are fascinated by the ghost investor returning after 3 years. This won't die down quickly." Jonas closed his eyes. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough that you should probably avoid public places for a while. Bad enough that Lily's school might see increased attention. Bad enough that anyone associated with you is going to get scrutinized. Anyone associated with him." That meant Arya. The woman already drowning in her family's expectations and public scrutiny, now being dragged into Jonas's mess because she'd trusted him enough to bring him to her sister's wedding. "Fix it," Jonas said tightly. "I don't care what it costs. Fix it." He hung up and sat in his bedroom, staring at his phone as more notifications poured in. His identity was everywhere now. J. Vale was back, whether Jonas Mercer wanted him or not, and there was no way to shove the ghost back into hiding. By noon, Jonas had turned off his phone entirely. The calls and texts had become relentless. Reporters, former colleagues, people he hadn't spoken to in years suddenly desperate to reconnect. Even 2 producers wanting to discuss documentary opportunities about the man who walked away from billions. The attention felt like drowning in slow motion, each notification another weight pulling him under. Lily found him sitting at the kitchen table, staring at his silent phone like it might explode. "Daddy, why aren't you answering your phone? Mrs. Chen called the apartment phone. She said people have been coming to her door asking about us." Jonas's head snapped up. "What people?" "She didn't say. Just that they were asking questions and she told them to leave." Lily's eyes were wide, worried. "Are we in trouble?" "No, baby. We're not in trouble." Jonas pulled her into a hug, feeling her small body tense against his chest. "Some people found out about my old job and they're curious. That's all. It'll blow over soon." But he could hear the lie in his own voice, and from the way Lily pulled back to study his face, she could hear it too. "Is this about the coffee lady?" she asked quietly. "About what you told her?" "In a way. Jonas brushed hair from her forehead. Sometimes when you try to keep something private, it makes people more interested when they find out. They want to know why it was secret in the first place. That's stupid. Yeah, Jonas agreed. It really is. They spent Saturday inside, curtains drawn, Jonas monitoring the news on his laptop while Lily built an elaborate castle from blocks on the living room floor. David called the apartment line twice with updates. The statement had been released, but interest was only growing. Someone had dug up old photos of Jonas from tech conferences, creating side-by-side comparisons with the candid shots from the wedding. The internet had become obsessed with his transformation from polished tech investor to ordinary single dad. They're calling it the greatest voluntary disappearing act in modern finance, David said during the second call. There's speculation you're writing a book, starting a new company, suffering from some kind of breakdown. The theories are everywhere. What are they saying about Arya? Jonas asked, the question he'd been afraid to voice. David hesitated. Some outlets are speculating about the nature of your relationship, whether she knew who you were, whether the Sterling family orchestrated the meeting for investment purposes. It's not kind, Jonas. Jonas closed his eyes. Can we sue them? For what? Speculation isn't liable unless they make specific false claims. And unfortunately, your appearance at her family wedding has made her part of the story. David's voice softened. I'm sorry. I know that's not what you wanted to hear. After hanging up, Jonas opened his laptop and searched Arya's name. The results made him feel physically ill. Sterling daughter's mystery. Date revealed as reclusive millionaire. Was Arya Sterling's wedding +1? A publicity stunt? Victoria Sterling denies orchestrating daughter's introduction to Jay Vale. The articles dissected everything. What Arya had been wearing, how long they'd danced, the fact that she'd left the reception early. Several included quotes from anonymous sources close to the family, suggesting that Victoria Sterling had been furious about Jonas's presence, that Arya had gone rogue by bringing an unapproved date, that the Sterling family was scrambling to control the narrative. One article included a photo of Arya on the terrace, and Jonas's chest constricted when he saw her face. Even in the grainy distance shot, he could see she'd been crying. Could see the moment he'd broken her trust, captured and disseminated to thousands of strangers who would now judge her choices, her emotions, her life. This was exactly what he'd feared, exactly why he'd walked away from being Jay Vale. Because once you became public property, everything you did became content for consumption. Every relationship got scrutinized. Every private moment became potential news. And he dragged Arya into it. Sunday morning arrived with a knock on the apartment door. Jonas checked the peephole and found Marcus Wellington standing in the hallway, dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, looking uncomfortable and determined in equal measure. Jonas opened the door. How did you find my address? I have good lawyers, Marcus said. Can I come in? Jonas glanced back at the apartment. Lily watching cartoons on the couch, breakfast dishes still in the sink, the lived-in chaos of their normal life. Then he stepped aside and let Marcus enter. Marcus looked around the small space with poorly concealed surprise, taking in the mismatched furniture, the crayon drawings stuck to the refrigerator with magnets, the general modest income family atmosphere. This wasn't where people expected billionaires to live, even reformed ones. Mr. Wellington, Lily said politely from the couch, muting the TV. Did you come to see my dad? I did. Marcus smiled at her with genuine warmth. You must be Lily. Your father talks about you. He does? Lily looked at Jonas with surprise. He mentioned you at the wedding, Marcus said. Said you were the best thing in his life. Lily's face lit up, then dimmed as she remembered the current situation. Are you here because of all the phone calls? Lily, why don't you watch your show in your room for a bit? Jonas suggested gently. She gathered her blanket and stuffed dragon toy and headed to her bedroom, but not before giving Marcus a long, assessing look that was pure 8-year-old judgment. The door closed with a firm click. She's protective, Jonas said. She should be. After the past few days, you probably need it. Marcus shoved his hands in his pockets. I came to apologize. I know I said I wouldn't tell anyone, and I didn't. But Elena's maid of honor overheard our conversation on the dance floor and told 3 people before dessert was served. By the end of the reception, half the guests knew. Someone contacted the press. It's not your fault, Jonas said tiredly. I should have known this would happen the moment I walked into that wedding. Should have known I couldn't just show up and stay invisible. But you tried anyway. For Arya. Marcus sat down on the couch without being invited, a presumption that would have annoyed Jonas, except that he looked genuinely distressed. She's not doing well. Elena called me this morning, said Arya hasn't left her apartment since Monday. Won't answer calls from her family. The press has been camped outside her building. Jonas's stomach dropped. How bad is it? Bad enough that Victoria Sterling actually apologized to her, publicly. Marcus pulled out his phone and showed Jonas an article. Made a statement yesterday about misjudging you at the wedding, about recognizing your character and integrity, about being honored that someone of your caliber chose to support her daughter. It's damage control, obviously, trying to spin the narrative so it looks like they knew who you were all along and approved. Jonas read the statement, Victoria's carefully crafted words that painted her initial dismissal as simply not recognizing him rather than judging him unworthy. The apology was designed to protect the Sterling family image, not to actually make amends. But it was still an apology, which meant Victoria Sterling had been forced to publicly admit error. That must have cost her. The thing is, Marcus continued, Arya demanded that apology. Elena said she told their mother either she apologizes for how she treated you or Arya walks away from the family entirely. No more board meetings, no more events, no more playing the dutiful daughter. Victoria apparently thought she was bluffing until Arya started packing. Jonas looked up sharply. Arya would give up her family? For someone she cared about being treated with basic respect? Apparently, yes. Marcus met his eyes. She's angry at you for not telling her the truth, but she's angrier at herself for caring about your identity once she found out. Elena said Arya keeps saying she proved you right, that knowing changed everything, and she hates that it did. Jonas sat down heavily in the armchair across from Marcus. I don't know how to fix this. Have you tried talking to her? She asked for space. She said she needed time to figure out what was real and what wasn't. Jonas rubbed his face. And maybe she's right to question it. Maybe I was playing at being ordinary. Maybe having money in reserve does make my choices fundamentally different than someone who's actually struggling. That's bullshit, Marcus said bluntly. You walked away from billions to live in a 2-bedroom apartment and raise your daughter alone. That's not playing, that's choosing. And choosing is harder than having no choice at all because it means accepting the consequences when you could have avoided them. Easy for you to say. You're not the one who lied about who they were. You didn't lie. You just didn't volunteer information that would have changed how people treated you. Marcus leaned forward. Look, I spent 5 years trying to find Jay Vale so I could thank him. Know what I discovered? He didn't want to be found. He didn't want gratitude or recognition or anything except to help without strings attached. That's rare. That's valuable. That's exactly the kind of person Arya needed in her life. Someone who saw her without wanting something from her. Until she found out I was hiding who I was, Jonas said. Then I became just another person with secrets and agendas. So prove her wrong. Marcus stood up. Prove that Jay Vale and Jonas Mercer are the same person with the same values. Prove that your friendship was real, even if the name wasn't complete. Stop hiding and show her who you actually are. All of it. No walls, no protection. That's terrifying. That's the point. Marcus headed for the door, then paused. For what it's worth, I think she'll listen. Elena says Arya's been rereading your note. What note? The one you apparently left at the cafe last week. Told the barista to give it to Arya if she came in. Arya's had it in her pocket every day since. Jonas stared at him, confused. I didn't leave a note. Then someone's lying or confused because Elena saw it. Several lines about understanding why Arya was angry and how Jonas was just trying to protect the one good thing he'd found in years. Marcus shrugged. Maybe you wrote it and forgot? You've had a stressful week. But Jonas knew he hadn't written any note, which meant either Marcus was wrong about what Elena had seen, or someone else had left a message for Arya at the cafe. Neither option made sense. After Marcus left, Jonas sat in his apartment and thought about what he'd said, about proving that Jonas and Jay were the same person, about showing Arya everything without walls or protection. The idea terrified him in a way that walking into the Sterling wedding hadn't. because this wasn't about surviving one uncomfortable evening. This was about exposing the whole messy truth, the divorce that had shattered him, the loneliness that had driven him to disappear, the fear that no one would ever see past the money to the person underneath. But if he wanted any chance of salvaging his friendship with Arya, he had to try. Monday morning, Jonas called David and asked him to arrange a meeting, not with lawyers or PR people, just with Arya, somewhere private, somewhere they could talk without cameras or eavesdropping guests. David promised to reach out through proper channels and call back. While Jonas waited, he did something he'd been avoiding for 3 years. He opened his laptop and pulled up the accounts he'd locked away when he'd changed his name. The investment portfolios, the trust funds, the quiet empire he'd built before walking away. He hadn't checked the balances in months, had let everything run on autopilot through automated systems and trustee oversight. The numbers were staggering. Even after setting aside funds for Lily's future and making anonymous donations to causes he cared about, Jay Vale was worth significantly more now than when he'd stopped actively investing. Money made money, especially when you already had enough to weather any market downturn. Jonas stared at the figures and felt nothing. No pride, no satisfaction, no sense of security, just the hollow recognition that this wealth, this power, was exactly what had destroyed his first marriage and corrupted every relationship he'd tried to build. Because people didn't want Jonas. They wanted access to these numbers. He closed the laptop and made lunch for Lily, determined to stay present in his actual life even while the specter of his old one loomed. They ate grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup, and Lily told him about the science project she was planning about bioluminescent creatures. "Did you know some jellyfish glow in the dark not to see but to confuse predators?" Lily said around a mouthful of sandwich. "They flash bright lights, and the predators get distracted and swim away." "That's a good survival strategy," Jonas said. "Emma says it's like a smoke bomb, but made of light. A light bomb." Lily considered this. "Do you wish you could do that? Flash bright lights and make all the reporters swim away?" Jonas smiled despite himself. "Every single day." "Well, you kind of did it backward. You made yourself dim so people wouldn't see you, and then someone turned the lights back on." Lily took another bite. "Maybe instead of hiding again, you should just stay bright but pick better places to glow. Like only around people who don't care about the light, just about you." Out of the mouths of 8-year-olds. Again. David called back that afternoon. "I reached out to the Sterling family's representation. Arya agreed to meet with you. Thursday afternoon, 2:30, at the place you suggested." Jonas's heart jumped. "She agreed? With conditions. She wants it private, no press, no family, no witnesses. Just you and her. And she wants you to come prepared to answer questions honestly without deflecting or justifying. Her words." "I can do that." "Jonas," David said carefully, "I've known you for 15 years. I watched you build an empire and then walk away from it. I watched you survive a divorce that would have broken most people. I've seen you at your strongest and your lowest. So I'm saying this as your friend, not your lawyer. Be careful. This woman matters to you. I can hear it in your voice. Don't rush this conversation trying to fix everything at once. Let her set the pace." "When did you become a relationship counselor?" "When my best client started making decisions with his heart instead of his spreadsheets," David said dryly. "It's terrifying to watch, but also kind of hopeful. Just don't screw it up." The days between Monday and Thursday crawled past with excruciating slowness. Jonas prepared for the conversation the way he used to prepare for high-stakes business negotiations, making mental lists of points to address, practicing honest answers to hard questions, reminding himself that defensiveness would only make things worse. But this wasn't a negotiation. This was an apology, an explanation, a plea for Arya to see that the person she'd trusted in the cafe still existed, even if his name carried more weight than she'd known. Tuesday afternoon, Jonas went to Brew and Page's even though he knew Arya wouldn't be there. He sat at their table with his coffee and his book, and honored the ritual because it felt important. Sarah the barista came over during a quiet moment. "Your friend came in yesterday," she said softly. "Didn't stay long, just sat here for about 10 minutes and left." "Did she say anything?" "Not to me, but she was crying." Sarah hesitated. "Look, I don't know what happened between you two. and it's not my business. But I've worked here for 2 years and I've never seen anyone look at someone the way you both looked at each other, like you'd found something rare. Don't waste that because of pride or fear or whatever's keeping you apart." Jonas nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Sarah squeezed his shoulder once and went back to the counter. Wednesday. Jonas took Lily to school and then drove to the park where they used to go when they'd first moved to the neighborhood. Back when everything was new and uncertain, and Jonas had been trying to build a life from scratch with a 6-year-old who kept asking when they could go home to their old house. He sat on the bench they'd claimed as theirs and thought about transformation, about who he'd been when he'd first sat here, broken, lost, convinced he'd made a terrible mistake walking away from security and status, about who he'd become over 2 years, steadier, more present, actually happy in small moments he'd never noticed before. Jay Vale had been successful but miserable. Jonas Mercer was struggling but content. And somewhere between those two identities was the actual person, flawed, complicated, trying to do right by his daughter and himself, and the few people who mattered. That was who he needed Arya to see. Not the ghost investor or the single dad playing at poverty, just Jonas, whole and honest, asking for a second chance at friendship with someone who'd become vital to his life in less than a month. Thursday morning, Jonas woke at dawn and couldn't get back to sleep. He made coffee and sat at the kitchen table watching sunrise paint the walls pink and gold while his mind raced through every possible version of the coming conversation. Arya angry and unforgiving. Arya sad and distant. Arya willing to listen but unable to trust. Arya deciding their friendship couldn't survive the weight of his deception. He made Lily breakfast and walked her to school, holding her hand the whole way, even though she usually insisted she was too old for that now. "Good luck with the coffee, lady," Lily said at the school entrance. "Remember what I said about beginnings not mattering as much as middles. And also," she looked up at him seriously, "if she's mean to you, you don't have to be friends with her, even if you like her. You deserve people who are nice." Jonas crouched down to her level. "When did you become the parent here?" "I've always been the parent. You just pretend you're in charge so I don't worry." But she hugged him tight, and Jonas felt his chest constrict with love for this small person who saw through every wall he tried to build. At 2:15, Jonas parked outside Brew and Page's. The cafe looked exactly the same as always. Warm lighting, mismatched furniture, the smell of coffee and old books drifting through the propped open door. But everything felt different now. This space had been their sanctuary, their neutral ground, the place where they'd both been safe to be nobody special. Now it was the site of a reckoning. Jonas walked in at exactly 2:25. Arya sat at their table, hands wrapped around a coffee cup, staring at the Sharpie quote about reading being dreaming with open eyes. She wore jeans and an oversized sweater, her cafe clothes, not her sterling family armor, but her face looked drawn, tired, like she hadn't been sleeping. She looked up when Jonas approached, and something complicated flickered across her expression. Not quite anger, not quite welcome, something in between. "Hi," Jonas said quietly. "Hi." Arya gestured at the empty chair across from her. "Sit down. We need to talk." Jonas sat. The table between them felt like miles instead of inches. He wanted to reach across and take her hand, offer comfort or connection, but he kept his hands in his lap and waited for Arya to set the pace like David had advised. "I have questions," Arya said without preamble, "and I need you to answer them honestly. Not spin, not justification, just truth. Can you do that?" "Yes." "Why didn't you tell me who you were?" The question was direct, uncompromising. "From the beginning, when we first met, why didn't you just say, 'I used to be someone else, and I'm trying to start over'?" Jonas took a breath. "Because every time I've told someone about my past, they've changed how they treated me. Either they wanted something from Jay Vale, investment advice, connections, money, or they pulled away because they couldn't get past the wealth disparity. Either way, Jonas disappeared. And I was so tired of disappearing. So you lied to me instead." "I didn't lie. I just didn't volunteer information that would have changed everything between us." Jonas met her eyes. "And I was right, wasn't I? The moment you found out, everything did change. You started looking at me differently, questioning whether our friendship was real, wondering if I'd been slumming or playing games. That's exactly what I was afraid of." Arya's jaw tightened. You don't get to make that decision for me. You don't get to decide what information I can handle or how I'll react. That's controlling and condescending, and it's exactly what my family does, filtering the truth so I only see what they want me to see. The comparison hit hard. Jonas felt his face flush. You're right. I'm sorry. I wasn't trying to control you. I was trying to protect something I thought was fragile. Our friendship? Arya's voice cracked slightly. You thought it was so fragile it couldn't survive honesty? I thought I was fragile, Jonas admitted. I thought if you knew who I'd been, you'd either want to use me like everyone else, or you'd hate me for having options you don't. And I couldn't handle either outcome. So I kept quiet and told myself it was for both of us, when really it was just cowardice. Arya stared at him for a long moment, and Jonas forced himself not to look away, not to soften the admission with excuses or qualifications. This was what she'd asked for, raw truth, no polish. I did hate you, Arya said quietly. For about 3 days, I absolutely hated you. Hated that you'd let me complain about my privileged problems to someone even more privileged. Hated that you'd hidden behind anonymity while I suffocated under visibility. Hated that I'd trusted you and you'd kept this massive secret. Jonas nodded, accepting the words even though they hurt. But then I kept thinking about our Tuesdays and Thursdays, Arya continued. About the way you'd listen without trying to fix things. The way you'd understood what I meant about needing to be somewhere nobody knew my name. The way you'd offered to come to that wedding knowing exactly what kind of room you'd be walking into. She paused. And I realized I hated myself more than I hated you. Because knowing your identity did change how I saw you, and that meant I was exactly like everyone else who judges people based on wealth instead of character. Arya, no, let me finish. She held up a hand. My mother saw you at that wedding and dismissed you as nobody. Then she found out who you were and suddenly you became somebody worth courting. I'd been so angry at her for being shallow and status obsessed, but I did the same thing in reverse. I thought you were worth knowing when you were Jonas Mercer. When I found out you were Jay Vale, I questioned everything about our friendship. That makes me just as bad as she is. That's not true, Jonas said firmly. You questioned our friendship because I'd kept secrets, not because of money. That's completely different. Is it though? Arya's eyes were bright with unshed tears. Because I keep replaying that night, and I can't separate my anger about the deception from my feelings about the wealth. They're tangled together. And I hate that I can't just say, who cares that you used to be rich? You're still the same person, because it does matter. It matters that you have safety nets I'll never have. It matters that you chose simplicity while I'm trapped in complexity. Those things are real even if they shouldn't change how I feel about you as a person. Jonas reached across the table slowly, giving Arya time to pull away. She didn't. He took her hand carefully, like it might break. You're right. Those things are real, and I'm sorry for pretending they weren't. I'm sorry for making you feel like you couldn't acknowledge the actual differences in our situations. That was unfair. Arya's fingers tightened around his, and for a moment they just sat there holding hands across the table like they had at the wedding before everything fell apart. The cafe hummed with its usual afternoon rhythm, espresso machine hissing, quiet conversations, pages turning, and Jonas felt something in his chest loosen slightly. I need to tell you the whole story, Jonas said quietly. Not the sanitized version, not the careful explanation, the actual truth about why I walked away and what it cost me and why I'm so terrified of going back. Okay? Arya's voice was steady despite the tears tracking down her cheeks. I'm listening. Jonas took a breath and let himself fall into honesty without a net. I met my ex-wife Rebecca when I was 26. I just made my first successful investment, and I thought I was brilliant. She was beautiful and ambitious, and she saw potential in me that I didn't see in myself. We got married fast, had Lily within a year, and for a while everything seemed perfect. He paused, remembering those early years with the distance that only pain and time could provide. But as Jay Vale became more successful, Jonas Mercer disappeared. Rebecca fell in love with what I could provide, not who I was. She loved the penthouse and the vacation homes and the galas. She loved being married to someone important. She didn't love me. How do you know? Arya asked gently. Because when Lily was 6, I told Rebecca I wanted to step back. scale down the investments, spend more time with our daughter, try to remember why we'd gotten married in the first place. And she looked at me like I'd suggested we burn down our house. Jonas's voice roughened. She said if I walked away from the money and the status, she'd leave me. That I could be Jay Vale with everything that came with it, or I could be nobody alone. So you chose nobody, Arya said. I chose Lily. I chose the chance to be her father instead of a wallet with a heartbeat. I chose the possibility that somewhere underneath all the money and power, there was still a person worth knowing. Jonas met Arya's eyes. Rebecca got the penthouse and most of the liquid assets. I got custody of Lily and the investment accounts I'd kept separate. I changed my name back to Mercer, my mother's maiden name, and I disappeared. Found this apartment, enrolled Lily in public school, started freelancing just enough to pay rent. And you've been hiding ever since, Arya said. It wasn't quite a question. I've been surviving, Jonas corrected, learning how to be present instead of profitable. Learning what Lily's favorite color is and how she likes her pancakes and what makes her laugh. Learning that the best parts of life are free, playground conversations and library books, and Tuesday afternoons in a cafe with someone who sees you instead of your bank account. Arya was quiet for a long moment, still holding his hand, processing everything he'd said. Finally, she spoke. I understand why you ran. I understand why you kept your past hidden. But Jonas, she squeezed his fingers. You can't spend the rest of your life terrified that being honest will make people treat you differently. That's not surviving. That's just a different kind of prison. I know, Jonas said, and I'm sorry I put you in the position of having to discover the truth the worst possible way. You deserved better. You deserved honesty from the beginning, and I was too scared to give it to you. Why? Arya leaned forward. Why were you so scared specifically with me? Jonas felt his throat tighten. Because you were the first person in 3 years who made me feel like myself again. Not Jay Vale, not just Lily's dad. Just Jonas, flawed and uncertain and trying his best. You sat across from me and didn't want anything except company and coffee and comfortable silence. I couldn't risk losing that. I couldn't risk watching you look at me differently once you knew. But I did look at you differently, Arya said softly. That's what you were afraid of. And it happened anyway. I know. So what do we do now? The question hung between them, heavy with possibility and pain. Because I can't pretend I don't know who you were. And you can't keep pretending you're not still him, at least partly. Jay Vale and Jonas Mercer are both you. Pretending otherwise isn't honest either. Jonas nodded slowly. She was right. He'd been so focused on burying Jay Vale that he'd created a false dichotomy, as if he could only be one person or the other. But the truth was more complicated. He was both. The man who'd built an empire, and the man who'd walked away from it. The investor who'd saved companies, and the father who made pancakes for dinner. All of it was real. All of it was him. I don't know what we do now, Jonas admitted. I just know that losing you, losing this, he gestured at the table, the cafe, the space they'd created together. That would be worse than any of the exposure or judgment or media attention. You matter to me, Arya, more than anonymity, more than safety. You matter. Arya's face crumpled slightly, and she pulled her hand back to wipe at her eyes. You matter to me too. That's why this hurt so much. That's why I couldn't just dismiss it as a harmless omission. You became important, Jonas. You became necessary. And then I found out you'd been holding back the biggest part of your story. I wasn't holding back, Jonas said. I was protecting. There's a difference. Is there? Arya challenged. Because from where I'm sitting, they look pretty similar. Both involve keeping secrets. Both involve deciding what the other person can handle. Both involve choosing control over vulnerability. Jonas flinched at the accuracy of her words. You're right. I'm sorry. I thought I was being careful. I was actually just being a coward. You're not a coward, Arya said firmly. Cowards don't walk away from billions to raise their daughters. Cowards don't agree to attend hostile family weddings to support someone they barely know. Cowards don't sit here and admit their mistakes without making excuses. She took a shaky breath. You're brave, Jonas. You're just also scared. Those things can exist together. Are you still angry at me? Jonas asked quietly. Arya considered this. Yes, and no. And mostly I'm just sad that we're here instead of where we were, when everything felt simple and safe and right. She paused. Do you think we can get back there? I don't know, Jonas said honestly. I don't know if we can go back, but maybe... He hesitated, then pushed forward. Maybe we can go forward. Build something new that includes all the truth this time. No more secrets. No more careful omissions. Just honest conversation between two people who matter to each other. That sounds terrifying, Arya said. It is terrifying, Jonas agreed. But so was showing up at your sister's wedding. So was sitting here today knowing you might tell me to leave and never come back. I'm willing to be terrified if it means having you in my life. Arya stared at him for a long moment, something shifting in her expression. Then she stood up abruptly. Come on. What? Where are we going? Outside. I need air. I need to move. I can't process this sitting still. She grabbed her coffee and headed for the door without waiting to see if Jonas would follow. He followed. Of course he followed. They walked down the street toward the small park 3 blocks from the cafe, not touching, not talking, just moving together through the autumn afternoon. Leaves crunched under their feet. The air smelled like wood smoke and approaching winter. Around them, the neighborhood went about its business. Parents pushing strollers, teenagers on skateboards, an old man walking a dog that looked older than him. Normal life. The kind Jonas had been trying to build for 2 years. The kind Arya was trying to escape from her family's world. They reached the park and sat on a bench overlooking a playground where children shrieked with joy on swings and slides. Arya watched them for a while in silence, then spoke without looking at Jonas. When I was 8, my father took me to his office for Bring Your Daughter to Work Day. I thought it would be fun, playing with desk supplies, meeting his colleagues, seeing where he spent all his time. Instead, he sat me down in his office and gave me a lecture about the importance of the Sterling name, about legacy and responsibility, and how everything we did reflected on the family. I was 8 years old, and he was already telling me that I wasn't just Arya. I was a Sterling, and that came with obligations. Jonas listened without interrupting, sensing that Arya needed to speak her own truth now. I spent my entire childhood learning that lesson, she continued, that my worth was tied to my family name, that my choices weren't just about me, they were about appearances and reputation and the family portfolio. Even college was strategic, Stanford business because that's where Sterlings went. Even my job at the family firm was predetermined. I've never made a single major life decision that was actually mine. She finally turned to look at Jonas, her eyes fierce. Except you. Meeting you, spending time with you, bringing you to that wedding, those were my choices. Mine. Not my mother's, not my father's, not the Sterling family legacies. And then I found out that even that choice was maybe influenced by who you were without me knowing it. Even my one act of rebellion might have been partially about status and connections without me realizing. No, Jonas said firmly. That's not true. You didn't know who I was. You made those choices based on who you thought I was, and you were right. Jonas Mercer is who I am. The quiet guy in the cafe who listens and makes bad jokes and understands what it's like to need anonymity. That person is real. Jay Vale's bank account doesn't change that. But it does change things, Arya insisted. Not who you are fundamentally, but the context, the options available to you, the safety nets. My mother's apology. That wasn't about you as a person. That was about Jay Vale's influence. She would never have apologized to regular Jonas Mercer. I know, Jonas said, and I hate that. I hate that Victoria Sterling only respects me now that she knows I have money and power. I hate that your family will treat me differently, that strangers will judge our friendship through the lens of net worth. I hate all of it, but... He paused, gathering courage. I can't hate the result. Your mother apologizing means you don't have to choose between me and your family. The exposure means I can't hide anymore, which is terrifying but also maybe necessary. And you knowing everything means we can build something real now instead of something based on partial truths. Arya pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. I asked my mother why she apologized. You know what she said? She said because Arya was right. I judged that young man based on appearances and I was wrong. Also, he's Jay Vale, and we can't afford to alienate someone with that kind of influence. both reasons. In the same breath, like they were equally important. Which one do you believe? Jonas asked. Both, Arya said with a bitter laugh. That's the thing about my mother. She's never just one thing. She's capable of genuine reflection and calculated strategy at the same time. She probably did realize she'd been unfair to you. And she definitely realized that being connected to Jay Vale is good for the family business. Those truths coexist. Like how I'm both Jonas and Jay, Jonas said. Both truths coexisting. Exactly. Arya rested her chin on her knees. I think that's what I'm struggling with. I want things to be simple, good or bad, honest or deceptive, real or fake. But nothing's that clean. You're a good person who kept secrets. I'm angry at you, but I also miss you. Your wealth is both a privilege and a burden. My family is both toxic and the only family I have. Everything's complicated. Welcome to being human, Jonas said gently. Population, everyone who's paying attention. Arya surprised him by laughing, a real laugh, not bitter or sarcastic. Is that what you tell Lily when she's upset? Sometimes. Usually I just make pancakes and hope for the best. Does it work? Pancakes solve more problems than you'd think. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the children play, letting the tension between them ease gradually. Jonas thought about all the conversations they'd had in the cafe, all the careful trust they'd built over Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. It had felt fragile then. It felt even more fragile now, damaged by secrets and exposure and misunderstanding. But maybe fragile things could be stronger than they seemed. Maybe the cracks were where the light got in. Maybe relationships that survived rupture became more resilient because they'd learned how to break and rebuild. I have a condition, Arya said abruptly. If we're going to try to be friends again, real friends, no secrets, no careful omissions, I have a condition. Okay, Jonas said carefully. What is it? You have to let me see all of you. Not just Jonas Mercer, the single dad. Not just Jay Vale, the investor. All of it. The parts you're proud of and the parts you're ashamed of. The choices you regret and the things you'd do again. I need to know the whole person, not just the version you think I can handle. Jonas felt his chest tighten. That's asking a lot. I know. I'm asking anyway. Arya turned to face him fully. Because I've spent my whole life with people who showed me edited versions of themselves. My parents, my colleagues, even Elena to some extent. Everyone performs. Everyone curates. I thought you were different. Turns out you were just better at hiding the performance. That's not fair. It's completely fair, Arya interrupted. You performed normalcy. You curated anonymity. You gave me the version of yourself you thought would be acceptable. That's still performance, Jonas. It's just a different kind. Jonas wanted to argue but couldn't. She was right. He'd been so focused on not being Jay Vale that he'd created another persona, Jonas Mercer, the humble single dad who wanted nothing except peace and pancakes. That version was true, but it wasn't complete. It was carefully constructed to avoid judgment and protect his daughter and keep people from asking too many questions. It was still a wall, just a different kind of wall. You're right, Jonas said quietly. I've been performing, not lying exactly, but definitely curating, showing you only the parts I thought you'd accept. He met her eyes. What if you see all of me and decide I'm not worth knowing? Then at least I'll have made that decision based on truth, Arya said. But Jonas, I've seen you with your daughter. I've heard how you talk about her. I've watched you sacrifice your comfort to support someone you barely knew. I've sat across from you for hours and felt safer than I've felt in years. All of that was real. So maybe there are parts of you I won't like. Maybe I'll struggle with some of your choices or judge some of your privileges. But I don't think I'll decide you're not worth knowing. I think I'll just know you better. What about you? Jonas asked. Do I get to see all of you too? That's only fair, Arya agreed. Though I should warn you, all of me includes someone who's struggling to figure out if she even wants to stay at her family's firm. Someone who lies awake at night wondering if she's wasted her entire life living someone else's plan. Someone who's angry and scared and tired of pretending to be fine when she's not. I already knew all that, Jonas said gently. You told me most of it over coffee. The difference is now we're naming it clearly instead of talking around it. Naming things makes them real, Arya said. Things were already real. We're just being honest about them now. Arya nodded slowly, something settling in her expression. Okay, we try this. Real friendship, complete honesty. No more walls or performances or carefully curated versions, just us, messy and complicated and figuring it out as we go. Just us, Jonas agreed. Messy and complicated. They shook hands solemnly, like they were sealing a contract, and then both laughed at the formality of the gesture. But something had shifted. The anger and hurt hadn't disappeared entirely, but they'd been acknowledged and examined and made room for. Now there was space to rebuild. I should warn you, Arya said as they stood to leave the park. My family's going to be insufferable now that they know who you are. My mother will try to get you to come to dinners and events. My father will want to discuss investment strategies. It's going to be exhausting. We'll handle it, Jonas said. Together. We'll set boundaries and enforce them and tell your parents no when we need to. We're good at standing up to difficult families. I've got an ex-wife who's made boundary setting an art form. How is Lily with all this? Arya asked. The exposure, the press attention, the sudden interest in your life? Confused mostly, worried about me. But she's resilient. Jonas smiled, thinking about his daughter. She told me that beginnings don't matter as much as middles. That who I was when I started isn't as important as who I'm being now. Smart kid. Terrifyingly smart. Sometimes I think she's raising me instead of the other way around. They walked back toward the cafe, falling into step beside each other naturally. The sun was starting to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The air had cooled enough that Arya wrapped her arms around herself for warmth. I miss this, she said quietly, just walking and talking, feeling like I could say anything without it being analyzed or judged or weaponized. I missed it too, Jonas admitted. These past 2 weeks without our Tuesday and Thursday meetings, it felt like something essential was missing, like I'd lost access to the one place where I could just exist. You can exist lots of places, Arya said. You just have to practice being yourself without permission. Is that what you're learning to do? Exist without permission? Trying to, Arya said. Some days are easier than others. Some days I still feel like I need my mother's approval for every decision, but then I remember how it felt to demand that apology from her. How it felt to say, treat him with respect or lose me. That was the first time in my life I'd ever drawn that kind of line with my parents. How did it feel? Jonas asked. Terrifying, liberating, like I might throw up or fly, and I wasn't sure which would happen first. Arya smiled. But I didn't back down, and my mother actually apologized. Maybe not for the right reasons entirely, but she apologized. I proved to myself that I could stand up to her. That matters. They reached Brew and Page's as the cafe was starting to transition into its evening crowd. College students settling in for study sessions, a book club gathering in the corner, the after-work regulars claiming their favorite spots. Sarah looked up from behind the counter and saw them together, and her face split into a relieved smile. Thank goodness, she said as they approached. I was starting to worry you two would never figure it out. Figure what out? Arya asked. That whatever happened between you was worth fixing. Sarah poured 2 fresh coffees without being asked. On the house. Consider it a reconciliation gift. We're not... Jonas started, then stopped. Actually, I don't know what we are. Friends? Rebuilding trust? Figuring things out? All of the above, Arya said, accepting her coffee. We're all of the above. They returned to their table, the same corner booth they'd claimed weeks ago when everything had been simple and anonymous and carefully constructed. But now they sat across from each other with all their truths visible, all their complications acknowledged, all their walls dismantled. Tell me about Lily, Arya said. Really tell me. Not just the highlights. I want to know what it's actually like raising her alone. What you struggle with. What scares you. So Jonas told her. About the nights he lay awake worrying whether he was doing enough, whether Lily would resent him someday for the divorce, whether choosing simplicity over wealth was selfish because it limited her opportunities. About the guilt he carried for not being able to afford ballet classes or summer camps, or college savings that matched what he could have provided as Jay Vale. About the terror he felt every time Lily got sick or sad or asked questions about her mother that he didn't know how to answer. "She's the best thing I've ever done," Jonas said. "The only part of my old life I don't regret. But raising her alone is the hardest thing I've ever attempted. Every decision feels monumental. Every mistake feels permanent. I'm constantly second-guessing whether I'm giving her enough or teaching her right or preparing her for a world that's going to judge her based on things beyond her control." "She seems pretty well adjusted from what you've described," Arya said. "She is, most days, but she's also 8 years old and already knows that her family is broken, that her mother chose wealth over her, that her father walked away from billions because staying would have destroyed him. That's a lot for a kid to carry." Jonas rubbed his face. "I worry what that knowledge will do to her as she gets older, whether it'll make her cynical or wise or something in between." "For what it's worth," Arya said carefully, "I think choosing to be present for her instead of profitable for her was the right call. My parents were always present physically, but absent emotionally. They provided everything except themselves. Lily might not have ballet classes, but she has a father who knows her favorite color and makes her pancakes and actually listens when she talks. That's worth more than you probably realize." Jonas felt something tight in his chest loosen slightly. "Thank you for saying that." "I'm not just saying it, I mean it." Arya reached across the table and took his hand. "You're a good father, Jonas. Even with all the complications and fear and second-guessing, maybe especially because of those things. You care enough to worry. That puts you ahead of a lot of parents." They sat like that for a while, hands linked across the table, coffee cooling, the cafe humming around them. Then Arya spoke again, her voice careful. "My turn to be vulnerable. I told my parents yesterday that I'm taking a leave of absence from the family firm." Jonas sat up straighter. "You're leaving?" "Temporarily, maybe permanently. I haven't decided yet." Arya's voice was steady, but Jonas could hear the uncertainty underneath. "I've been working there since I graduated college. 8 years of doing exactly what they expected, following their plan, never questioning whether it's what I actually wanted. And I woke up last Tuesday and realized I've built an entire life I don't recognize. So I'm taking 6 months, figuring out who I am when I'm not performing the role of dutiful, sterling daughter." "How did your parents react?" "About how you'd expect. Mother said I was being reckless and emotional. Father asked what this would do to the company's image. Elena was the only one who seemed to understand. She told me she's been waiting for me to leave for years." Arya smiled sadly. "Apparently everyone could see I was miserable except me." "What are you going to do with 6 months?" Jonas asked. "I have no idea," Arya admitted. "Maybe travel. Maybe volunteer somewhere. Maybe just sit in cafes and read books and figure out what makes me feel alive. I've spent so long doing what I should do that I don't know what I want to do." "That's brave," Jonas said. "Terrifying and brave." "I learned from watching you," Arya said simply. "You walked away from everything to figure out who you were underneath the money and status. I'm doing the same thing, just with better planning and fewer secrets." Jonas laughed despite himself. "Fair point about the secrets." They finished their coffee and ordered dinner from the cafe's small menu. Sandwiches and soup, nothing fancy, just food shared between friends who were learning how to trust each other again. They talked about everything and nothing. Lily's dragon book and Emma, the new friend. Elena's honeymoon plans. The cold front moving in next week. Small talk, but genuine. Real connection without performance. As the cafe began to empty for the evening, Sarah came over to their table. "We're closing in 20 minutes, she said apologetically. "But I'm really glad you two worked things out. This place didn't feel right without you both here." "We'll get out of your way," Jonas said, standing and leaving cash on the table for their food and a generous tip. Outside, the evening had turned properly cold. Arya shivered, and Jonas resisted the urge to offer his jacket. They were rebuilding friendship, not crossing into whatever territory that gesture might suggest. But then Arya stepped closer, shoulder brushing his, and Jonas understood that physical comfort and emotional boundaries could coexist. "Walk me to my car?" Arya asked. "Of course." They walked the 2 blocks to where Arya had parked, neither of them in a hurry despite the cold. At her car, Arya turned to face him. "Tuesday?" she asked. 2:30? Same table? I'll be there, Jonas promised. And Jonas? Arya's voice was serious. Thank you for today, for being honest even when it was hard, for letting me be angry without getting defensive, for showing up even though you knew I might tell you to leave. Thank you for giving me another chance, Jonas said, for seeing past the secrets to the person underneath, for being willing to rebuild instead of just walking away. Arya nodded, then surprised him by pulling him into a hug. It was brief, almost awkward, but genuine. When she pulled back, she was smiling. We're going to figure this out, she said. It won't be easy or simple or clean, but we're going to figure out how to be real friends, the kind who know everything about each other and still choose to show up. Deal, Jonas said. He watched her drive away, then walked to his own car with a lightness in his chest he hadn't felt in weeks. The exposure of his identity still terrified him. The media attention would probably continue for a while. His carefully constructed anonymity was gone, maybe permanently. But Arya knew everything now, and she'd chosen to give him another chance anyway. That had to count for something. 2 weeks later, Jonas sat at their table in Bruin Pages with a book he was actually reading instead of pretending to read. Lily was at Emma's house for a play date. A real friendship was developing there, built on shared interests in lizards and space facts instead of parental matchmaking. The press attention had started to die down as Jonas continued to refuse interviews and avoid public appearances. He was yesterday's news again, which suited him fine. The bell above the door chimed. Arya walked in wearing jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back, looking tired but genuinely happy. She'd been taking her leave of absence seriously. Last week she'd told Jonas about volunteering at a literacy center, teaching adult immigrants to read English. She'd sounded more passionate about that work than she'd ever sounded about her job at Sterling Financial. Hi, she said, sliding into her chair. Sorry I'm late. The session ran long and I didn't want to rush out when we were in the middle of a lesson. How's it going? Jonas asked, setting his book aside. It's incredible, Arya said, her face lighting up. I'm working with this woman from Syria who's learning to read English so she can help her kids with homework. Today, she read an entire children's book by herself and she cried. And I cried and it was just... She shook her head, unable to find words. It matters. What I'm doing matters in a way the family business never did. Are you thinking of making it permanent? Jonas asked carefully. The leave of absence? Maybe, probably. I don't know yet. Arya wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, a gesture Jonas had come to recognize as her thinking pose. I had dinner with my parents last night, told them I might not come back to the firm. Mother handled it better than I expected, said if I was determined to throw away my future, at least I could do it usefully, which for her is basically a blessing. Progress, Jonas said, small progress. She still introduces me as my daughter who's taking time off like it's a temporary illness. But she's not actively sabotaging my choices, which is more than I hoped for. They fell into their familiar rhythm, coffee and conversation, comfortable silences, the easy intimacy of two people who'd learned how to be honest with each other. Sarah brought them refills without being asked. The cafe regulars nodded greetings. Everything felt both exactly the same as 3 months ago and completely different. I have something to tell you, Jonas said during one of the quiet moments. Something I've been thinking about for a while. Arya looked up, immediately alert. Good something or bad something? Neither. Both. Complicated something. Jonas took a breath. I've been talking with Marcus Wellington. Remember how he gave me his card at the wedding? We've been meeting for coffee, discussing what it means to use wealth responsibly. And I've decided... He paused, gathering courage. I've decided to start investing again. Not as Jay Vale, as Jonas Mercer. Small investments in companies that align with my values. Businesses that prioritize people over profits, sustainability over quarterly earnings, community impact over shareholder returns. Arya was quiet for a moment, processing. That's a big decision. What changed? You did, Jonas said simply. Watching you walk away from your family's expectations and choose something that actually mattered, it made me realize I was still hiding, not from the press or the attention, but from using my resources to make a difference. I walked away from wealth because I hated what it did to me. But money itself isn't the problem. It's how you use it and who you become because of it. So you're becoming Jay Vale again? There was no judgment in Arya's voice, just curiosity. No, I'm integrating both parts. Being Jonas Mercer, who happens to have significant resources and chooses to use them intentionally. Not hiding, not performing, just existing as a whole person instead of fragmenting myself into acceptable pieces. Arya smiled, and something in her expression was proud. That's growth. Real growth. I'm happy for you. It's terrifying, Jonas admitted. I'm going to have to be more public. People will want things from me again. The attention will increase. But Lily and I talked about it, and she said... He laughed softly, remembering the conversation. She said, if you can help people and you don't because you're afraid of being noticed, that's just being selfish with extra steps. 8 years old, and she's calling me out on my avoidance. Wise beyond her years, Arya said. When do I get to meet her properly? Not just hearing about her, actually meeting her. Jonas felt something warm bloom in his chest. Are you sure? Meeting Lily it's significant. It means you're not just my friend, you're part of our lives. Part of what we're building. I know, Arya said softly. I'm sure. If we're doing this whole honesty thing, then you should know that you and Lily have become important to me. Not just you. Both of you, and I'd like to meet the person who taught you how to be brave. Next Saturday, Jonas said before he could second-guess the invitation. We're going to the Natural History Museum. Lily wants to see the dinosaur exhibit for the 100th time. You could come with us. Spend the day. See what our normal life actually looks like. I'd love that, Arya said, and Jonas believed her. Saturday arrived bright and cold, the kind of November morning that promised snow but hadn't quite delivered yet. Jonas and Lily met Arya at the museum entrance, and Jonas watched nervously as the two most important people in his life sized each other up. You're the coffee lady, Lily said with characteristic bluntness. I am, Arya agreed, crouching down to Lily's level. And you're the dragon book reader with excellent taste in library materials. Dad told you about my book? He tells me about lots of things you do. He's very proud of you. Lily considered this, then apparently decided Arya had passed some internal test. Okay, you can come see the dinosaurs with us, but you have to be willing to look at the pteranodon for at least 15 minutes because everyone always wants to leave before I'm done learning about their wing structure. 15 minutes minimum, Arya promised solemnly. I'm very interested in wing structures. They spent 4 hours at the museum, and Jonas watched Arya interact with his daughter with growing wonder. She asked Lily real questions and listened to the answers. She didn't talk down or simplify or perform interests she didn't feel. She treated Lily like a person worth knowing, which was exactly what Lily needed and rarely received from adults. At the Pteranodon exhibit, Lily explained wingspan ratios while Arya took notes on her phone. At the gift shop, Arya helped Lily choose between 2 books about prehistoric marine life. At lunch in the museum cafe, they debated whether Triceratops could have beaten Tyrannosaurus Rex in a fair fight. Jonas mostly just watched, his heart doing complicated things in his chest, recognizing that something significant was happening. His carefully separated worlds were merging. His daughter and his friend were becoming friends themselves. The walls he'd built between different parts of his life were coming down, and instead of feeling exposed, he felt whole. She's great, Lily announced on the drive home after they'd dropped Arya at her car. Can we see her again? You liked her, Jonas asked, trying to sound casual. She actually listened when I talked about wing structures. Most adults just pretend to pay attention. Lily paused thoughtfully. Also, she makes you smile differently. Like you're not trying to smile, you just are smiling. That's nice. When did you become so observant about my emotional states? I've always been observant, Daddy. You're just starting to notice that I notice. Lily yawned, exhausted from their museum adventure. Can we invite her to Thanksgiving? Jonas's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Thanksgiving was next week. They usually spent it quietly at home, just the two of them, because Rebecca had primary custody for Christmas, and Thanksgiving was Jonas's consolation prize. Inviting Arya would mean integrating her further into their small family unit. It would mean crossing from friendship into something more significant. Maybe, Jonas said carefully. Let me think about it. You mean let you be scared about it and then eventually decide yes because you like her and life's too short to not invite people you like to eat turkey with you? How are you 8? I keep asking myself the same question, Lily said seriously. That evening, after Lily was asleep, Jonas texted Arya. Lily asked if you want to come to Thanksgiving dinner next week. Just the 3 of us, nothing fancy. Probably dry turkey and definitely burnt rolls because I always forget about the rolls. No pressure to say yes. Arya's response came quickly. I'd love to. I was dreading spending it at my parents' estate with 50 people I don't like. This sounds much better. What can I bring? Just yourself. And low expectations for my cooking. Done and done. Thank you for including me. This means a lot. Jonas set his phone aside and sat in his quiet living room, processing the fact that his carefully reconstructed life was opening up in ways he'd convinced himself were too risky. But maybe risk was the point. Maybe the whole reason he'd walked away from wealth and status was so he could build something genuine. And genuine things required vulnerability, which required risk. Thanksgiving morning arrived with actual snow this time, fat flakes falling lazily outside the windows. Jonas started the turkey early, following his mother's old recipe that he'd carefully saved. Lily helped with the cranberry sauce, standing on a step stool at the stove and wielding a wooden spoon like a weapon. When is Arya coming? Lily asked for the 4th time. 2 o'clock. Same as the last 3 times you asked. I'm just excited. We never have guests for Thanksgiving. It's always just us. Is that bad? Jonas asked, suddenly worried. That it's usually just us? Lily thought about this. No, I like our small Thanksgivings, but I also like that we're making it bigger this year. It means we're not hiding anymore. Jonas stopped stirring the gravy and looked at his daughter. What do you mean, not hiding? You've been hiding since we left Mom, Lily said matter-of-factly. Not in a bad way, in a protecting us way, but hiding still. Now you're letting someone in. That means you're not scared anymore. Or you're still scared but doing it anyway, which is braver. Jonas crouched down to Lily's level. You know I'm doing my best, right? That sometimes I get things wrong, but I'm always trying to do what's right for us? I know, Daddy. Lily hugged him tight, getting cranberry sauce on his shirt. You're doing great. I just want you to be happy. You seem happy when Arya's around, so I'm glad she's coming to Thanksgiving. Arya arrived at exactly 2 o'clock, carrying a pumpkin pie from the bakery down the street and wearing jeans and a sweater instead of anything fancy. She looked nervous, which somehow made Jonas feel better about his own nerves. Welcome to our humble Thanksgiving, Jonas said, taking the pie. Fair warning, the turkey might be dry, the rolls are definitely burnt, and Lily's already asked me 6 times when you'd get here. 5 times, Lily called from the living room. Get your facts right, Dad. 5 times, Jonas corrected with a smile. They ate dinner at the small table in Jonas's dining area, the 3 of them crowded together, passing dishes and telling stories and laughing at Jonas's burnt rolls. Arya fit into their rhythm like she'd always been there. She complimented Lily's cranberry sauce. She didn't comment on the modest apartment or the mismatched dishes or the fact that their Thanksgiving looked nothing like what she was probably used to. She just existed with them, present and genuine, exactly as she'd promised to be. After dinner, while Jonas did dishes and Lily watched the parade on TV, Arya joined him in the kitchen. Thank you for today, she said quietly, drying plates while Jonas washed. This is the best Thanksgiving I've had in years, maybe ever. Even with burnt rolls? Especially with burnt rolls, it was real. Your family, this apartment, the way Lily feels safe enough to just be herself, all of it was real. That's rare, Jonas. Don't underestimate how rare that is. Jonas handed her another plate. I spent so long trying to hide who I was that I forgot hiding isn't the same as protecting. Real protection means being strong enough to let people in, not clever enough to keep them out. That sounds like wisdom, Arya said. That sounds like something Lily probably told me, and I'm pretending I thought of myself. They finished the dishes in comfortable silence, and when they returned to the living room, Lily had built a blanket fort and declared that they all had to watch a movie inside it. So Jonas and Arya crawled into the fort, sitting on either side of Lily, and watched an animated movie about dragons that Lily had seen 100 times and could quote from memory. Halfway through, Lily fell asleep between them, her head on Jonas's lap, her feet in Arya's. Jonas looked across his sleeping daughter at the woman who'd become essential to his life in just a few months, and Arya looked back, and something passed between them. Understanding, connection, the recognition of something fragile and important being carefully tended by two people who'd both learned the hard way that things worth having require courage to build and honesty to maintain. "We're going to be okay," Arya whispered, careful not to wake Lily. "Yeah," Jonas agreed quietly. "I think we really are." December arrived with more snow and shorter days, and the creeping awareness that the year was ending. Jonas's small investment venture was taking shape. He'd quietly funded 3 companies aligned with his values, structured the deals to prioritize long-term community impact over short-term returns, and declined all media requests about his comeback. He wasn't coming back. He was simply existing with intention instead of fear. Arya had officially resigned from Sterling Financial, announced plans to start a nonprofit focused on adult literacy, and started looking at small offices near the cafe where she could run her new organization. Her parents had been horrified until Marcus Wellington had offered to help fund the nonprofit's startup costs, and suddenly Victoria Sterling had decided it was a prestigious charitable venture. "I know she's only supportive because Marcus made it sound important," Arya told Jonas over their Tuesday coffee, "but I'll take it. Support with mixed motives is better than no support at all." "Progress," Jonas said, echoing what had become their word for small victories against old patterns. "Progress," Arya agreed. 2 weeks before Christmas, Jonas received a phone call from his lawyer, David, that he'd been half expecting for months. "Rebecca's challenging the custody arrangement," David said without preamble. "She's claiming that the media exposure makes you unfit to provide a stable environment for Lily. She wants primary custody." Jonas felt his blood run cold. On what grounds? That returning to public life as Jay Vale puts Lily at risk of unwanted attention and scrutiny. That you can't provide the same resources she can. That your voluntary poverty, her lawyer's words, is a form of neglect. David's voice was grim. "It's garbage, Jonas. But it's garbage we have to take seriously. She's got expensive lawyers and a good narrative about protecting her daughter from her father's midlife crisis." "What do I do?" Jonas asked, his voice steady despite the panic rising in his chest. "You document everything. You show that Lily is thriving in your care. You demonstrate that your choices are deliberate and in her best interest, not reckless or negligent. And you prepare for a fight, because Rebecca's not going to back down easily." Jonas hung up and sat in his apartment, staring at nothing, feeling the familiar terror of potentially losing his daughter, the one person who made all his choices worthwhile. He'd walked away from wealth to be present for Lily. He'd rebuilt his entire life around giving her stability and love and attention. And now Rebecca, who called once a month and had missed the last 3 birthdays, wanted to take her away. He called Arya. She answered on the first ring. "What's wrong?" she asked immediately. "You never called during the day." Jonas told her everything. About Rebecca's challenge, about the custody hearing, about the fear that his choice to start investing again had given his ex-wife ammunition to claim he was unstable. By the time he finished, his voice was shaking. "I can't lose her, Arya. She's everything. If Rebecca takes her, if she grows up in that world where love is conditional and worth is measured in dollars..." He couldn't finish the sentence. "You're not going to lose her," Arya said firmly. "We're going to fight this, together. I know lawyers. I know how to document care and stability. I know how to build a case. And Jonas, Lily loves you. That's obvious to anyone who spends 5 minutes with you both. No judge is going to take her from a loving parent and give her to someone who's been absent for years." "You don't know that." "I do know that," Arya insisted. "And I also know that you're not alone in this. You have friends, you have resources, you have a community of people who see what kind of father you are. We're going to show that court exactly what Rebecca's trying to take away, and they're not going to let her do it." Jonas felt something in his chest loosen slightly. "You'd help me with this? Even though it's messy and complicated and probably going to take months?" "Of course I'm going to help you with this," Arya said, and she sounded almost offended that he'd questioned it. "That's what friends do. That's what people who matter to each other do. They show up when it's hard. They stand together when it's scary. They fight for the things that are worth protecting. I don't know how to thank you. You don't thank me. You just trust me. Trust us. Trust that this thing we've built is strong enough to handle this. Arya paused. I'm coming over, right now. We're going to start building your case, and we're going to do it together. She arrived within the hour, laptop and notebooks and determination radiating from her like heat. They spent the evening documenting everything: Lily's grades, her friendships, her happiness, Jonas's involvement in her school, the stability of their life together. They built a timeline of Rebecca's absence, her missed commitments, her periodic interest in parenting that coincided with tax season when dependent deductions mattered. It was painful work, cataloging his marriage's failure and his ex-wife's shortcomings. But Arya sat beside him through all of it, asking questions, taking notes, being the steady presence he needed to keep moving forward. At 8 o'clock, Lily came out of her room where she'd been reading and sat down at the table with them. Are you worried about Mom trying to take me away? She asked directly. Jonas and Arya exchanged glances. There was no point in lying. Lily had probably heard his phone call and definitely sensed the tension. Yes, Jonas admitted, I'm worried, but we're working on making sure that doesn't happen. Good, Lily said, because I don't want to live with Mom. I want to stay here with you, with our home and our life and our Tuesday-Thursday cafe friend who comes to Thanksgiving. You might have to tell that to a judge, Jonas said carefully. If this goes to court, they'll ask you where you want to live. You don't have to decide right now. I already decided, Lily interrupted. I decided 2 years ago when we left. I decided every day since when you make me breakfast and ask about school and actually listen to my answers. I decided when you came to my science fair even though you had to miss work. I decided when you learned about wing structures because I cared about them. Mom gives me stuff. You give me you. That's better. Jonas felt his eyes sting with tears. He pulled Lily into a hug and held her tight, while Arya looked away politely, giving them their moment. We're going to fight this, Jonas promised, and we're going to win. And our life, this life, the one we built together, that's going to stay exactly as it is. Okay, Daddy. Lily pulled back and looked at Arya. You're helping us, right? Every step of the way, Arya promised. Good. Because you're part of our family now. Families protect each other. The custody hearing was scheduled for mid-January, giving them 6 weeks to prepare. Jonas spent those weeks documenting everything, gathering testimony from Lily's teachers and pediatrician and Mrs. Chen, the neighbor, who watched her sometimes. Marcus Wellington wrote a character reference describing Jonas's integrity and dedication. Even Sarah from the cafe wrote a letter describing how Jonas's commitment to routine and stability had made him a fixture in their community. Arya coordinated everything, built the case like she was running a military campaign, refused to let Jonas spiral into despair during the hard moments. She showed up. Every day, sometimes literally, sometimes just through texts reminding him to eat or sleep or take breaks from preparation. She stood beside him when everything felt impossible. Exactly like she'd promised. Christmas came and went quietly, Jonas and Lily making cookies and watching movies and pretending everything was normal. Rebecca called Lily on Christmas morning for exactly 7 minutes before making excuses about a lunch reservation. Lily hung up and immediately asked Jonas if they could make hot chocolate, and Jonas understood that his daughter had already chosen her family. The hearing arrived on a gray January morning. Jonas wore his navy suit from the wedding, Arya beside him in professional clothes that made her look every inch the sterling daughter, despite her having walked away from that world. Lily stayed with Mrs. Chen. She wouldn't have to testify unless the judge requested it, which Jonas desperately hoped wouldn't happen. Rebecca appeared with 3 lawyers, all expensive suits and calculated confidence. She looked exactly like Jonas remembered, beautiful, polished, every hair in place. She looked at him across the courtroom, and something cold flickered in her eyes. She'd expected him to back down, to settle, to accept whatever terms she offered rather than fight publicly. She'd underestimated how much he loved his daughter. The hearing took 4 hours. Rebecca's lawyers painted Jonas as unstable, a man who'd walked away from billions in what they called a mental breakdown, who now lived in poverty despite having resources, who'd exposed his daughter to media scrutiny through his attention-seeking return to investing. They implied that Jonas's friendship with Arya was inappropriate, suggested that his choices were reckless, argued that Lily deserved the stability and resources only Rebecca could provide. Jonas's lawyer countered with documentation of Rebecca's absence, testimony from people who saw Jonas's daily dedication, evidence of Lily's thriving in his care. Marcus Wellington's statement carried significant weight, a respected CEO describing Jonas as the most thoughtful person he'd known, someone who'd saved his company with no expectation of recognition, someone whose choices reflected deep integrity rather than instability. Arya sat in the gallery behind Jonas, exactly where he could see her if he turned around, her presence a constant reminder that he wasn't alone in this. Finally, the judge called a recess to review the documentation. Jonas stepped outside the courtroom with Arya, his hands shaking from adrenaline and fear. "You did great," Arya said firmly. "Your lawyer was clear, the documentation is strong, and Lily's voice came through in every piece of evidence. You showed them exactly what kind of father you are." "What if it's not enough?" Jonas whispered. "It will be enough. It has to be enough. Because the alternative is unthinkable." Arya took his hands. "Whatever happens, we'll handle it. Together. That's what we do now." The judge returned after 30 minutes that felt like 30 years. Everyone stood as she entered, and Jonas felt his heart hammering so hard he thought it might break through his chest. "I've reviewed all the documentation and testimony presented today," the judge said, her voice measured and professional. "This is a difficult case because both parents clearly love their daughter and want what's best for her. However, custody decisions must be based on the child's best interests, not parental preferences." Jonas held his breath. "Mr. Mercer, your life choices may seem unconventional to some. Walking away from significant wealth, choosing a modest lifestyle despite having resources, returning to public investing after years of privacy, these decisions raise questions. However, the evidence overwhelmingly demonstrates that these choices were made thoughtfully and in your daughter's best interest. Every person who interacts with you and Lily describes a child who is happy, well-adjusted, thriving academically and socially, and deeply bonded with her father." The judge turned to Rebecca. "Ms. Vale, your concerns about media exposure are noted. However, the evidence shows minimal impact on Lily's daily life. Your own absence from that daily life is well documented. While you can certainly provide material resources, that alone does not constitute stability or emotional support." Jonas's hands were clenched so tight his nails were cutting into his palms. "My ruling is that current custody arrangements will remain in place," the judge said. "Mr. Mercer retains primary custody. Ms. Vale's visitation schedule remains unchanged unless both parties agree to modifications. This ruling can be revisited if circumstances materially change, but based on current evidence, Lily is clearly thriving in her father's care. This hearing is adjourned." Jonas's knees went weak with relief. Arya caught his arm, steadying him, her face split in a wide smile. Across the courtroom, Rebecca's expression was cold fury, but Jonas didn't care. He'd won. Lily got to stay with him. Their life continued. Outside the courthouse, Jonas called Mrs. Chen. She answered immediately. "We won," Jonas said, his voice breaking. "She stays with me." "Of course you won," Mrs. Chen said practically. "Anyone with eyes can see you're a good father. Now come pick up your daughter. She's been worried sick." Jonas and Arya drove together to Mrs. Chen's house. When they arrived, Lily burst through the door and ran straight into Jonas's arms. "We won?" she asked against his chest. "We won. You're staying with me. Nothing changes." Lily pulled back, tears streaming down her face, and hugged him so tight Jonas thought his ribs might crack. Then she reached out and pulled Arya into the hug too, the three of them standing on Mrs. Chen's porch, holding each other like they were the only solid things in a shifting world. "Thank you," Lily said to Arya, "for helping Dad, for being our friend, for being part of our family." "Thank you for letting me be part of it," Arya said, her own voice thick with emotion. "You two are the best thing that's happened to me in years." 2 months later, Jonas sat at their table in Brew and Page's on a Tuesday afternoon in March. Outside, spring was beginning to win its battle against winter. Buds on trees, temperatures climbing, that particular quality of light that promised warmer days ahead. Arya walked in right at 2:30, and Jonas felt his heart do the complicated thing it had been doing for months now, whenever he saw her. Friendship had somehow shifted into something more, had grown roots deeper than either of them had planned, had become essential in ways that went beyond companionship. She sat across from him with coffee and that smile that meant she had news. "The nonprofit is officially registered," Arya said. "We have our 501c3 status, our first grant funding, and enough volunteers to start 3 adult literacy programs next month. It's real, Jonas. It's actually real." "That's incredible," Jonas said, and meant it. "You built something meaningful from scratch. That's not easy." "I learned from watching you," Arya said. "You rebuilt your entire life on your own terms. That takes courage. I just needed someone to show me it was possible." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, and Jonas thought about how much had changed since that first Tuesday when a tired woman in an oversized sweatshirt had asked if the seat across from him was taken. How they'd built trust in 45-minute increments, how that trust had fractured and been carefully repaired, how they'd learned to be honest even when honesty was terrifying. "I need to tell you something," Jonas said. Arya looked up, immediately alert. "Good something or bad something?" "Good something, I hope." Jonas took a breath. "These Tuesday and Thursday meetings, they're not enough anymore. I look forward to them all week, and then they're over too fast, and I spend the days between them thinking about things I want to tell you or show you or share with you, and I realized—" He stopped, gathering courage. "I realized somewhere along the way, you stopped being just my friend. You became my best friend. You became someone I can't imagine my life without. You became essential," Arya finished softly. "You became essential to me, too." Jonas reached across the table and took her hand. "So I'm asking, carefully, because I don't want to ruin what we have, but also honestly because we promised no more walls. Would you want to try being more than friends? Would you want to build something together that includes all the Tuesday-Thursday meetings, but also weekends and holidays and just regular life? Would you want to be part of what Lily and I have built here?" Arya's eyes were bright with tears. "I've been wanting to ask you the same thing for months. I was terrified because what if I was reading things wrong? What if you just wanted friendship? What if pushing for more meant losing everything?" "So we've both been scared," Jonas said with a soft laugh. "So we've both been scared," Arya agreed. "But you know what? We've been scared before, and we survived it. We can be scared about this too, and survive it. We can build something real and messy and complicated and worth the risk." "Is that a yes?" "That's the most definite yes I've ever given to anything." Arya squeezed his hand. "Yes to more than friendship. Yes to building something together. Yes to being part of your and Lily's life in whatever way makes sense. Yes to all of it." Jonas stood up, walked around the table, and pulled Arya into a hug right there in the middle of the cafe. Sarah saw them and actually cheered from behind the counter. The college students in the corner looked up and smiled. The retired couple sharing a scone gave them a knowing nod. "Finally," Sarah called. "I've been waiting for you two to figure this out for months." Jonas and Arya pulled apart, both laughing and crying and feeling exactly like people do when something fragile becomes solid, when something possible becomes real, when something worth protecting is finally being built with intention and honesty and no walls left between. That evening, Jonas picked Lily up from school and told her about the conversation with Arya. She listened carefully, then grinned. "Does this mean she's coming to more dinners? Because her cooking is better than yours, no offense." "Lots of offense taken," Jonas said. "But yes, probably more dinners." "Good. I like her. She makes you happy, and she actually listens when I talk about wing structures." Lily paused. "Also, I think you should know that Emma's mom asked if you were dating anyone because she thinks you're handsome, and Emma told her you were already in love with the coffee lady. So basically, my entire second grade class has been rooting for you." "I'm going to pretend I didn't hear that," Jonas said. "Coward," Lily said cheerfully. 6 months later, on a Tuesday afternoon in late September, Jonas and Arya sat at their table in Bruin Pages exactly like they had 100 times before, except now they held hands openly instead of secretly under the table. Now they kissed goodbye when one of them left. Now they made plans that extended beyond just the next meeting. Lily was starting third grade and had decided she wanted to study marine biology. Arya's nonprofit had expanded to 5 locations and was being profiled in the State Education Journal. Jonas's investment portfolio included 12 companies and had started attracting attention from other investors who wanted to prioritize impact over returns. Everything had changed. Everything was exactly the same. They still met Tuesdays and Thursdays at 2:30, still sat at the same table, still ordered the same coffee, still honored the ritual that had started everything. "I have something for you," Arya said, reaching into her bag. She pulled out a small wrapped package and handed it across the table. Jonas opened it carefully. Inside was a framed photo, one he'd never seen before. It showed their table at the cafe, empty except for 2 coffee cups, afternoon light streaming through the window, the reading quote visible on the brick wall behind the chairs. "Sarah took it months ago," Arya explained, "before the wedding, before everything fell apart, before we learned how to be honest with each other. She said she'd never seen 2 people look more like they'd found home in an unexpected place. I wanted you to have it, a reminder of where we started." Jonas stared at the photo, at the simple composition that somehow captured everything they'd built. "It's perfect." "We're perfect," Arya corrected, "not in the everything's easy way, in the everything's worth fighting for way, in the we've survived hard things and chose each other anyway way." "That's the best kind of perfect," Jonas said. They sat there as the afternoon light shifted and the cafe filled and emptied and filled again. 2 people who'd needed to hide had found each other in a bookstore cafe and had built something real out of coffee and honesty and the courage to be fully known. 2 people who'd been performing different versions of themselves had learned how to exist without walls. 2 people who'd been running from their pasts had figured out how to walk forward into futures they were building together. No more secrets, no more walls, no more pretending. Just Jonas and Arya, choosing each other completely, right where they started. In a corner booth at Bruin Pages, where reading is dreaming with open eyes, and where 2 people had finally woken up to something real.